Welcome, welcome. You're here at N.O. Harry. Today we present to you, what if Madame Pomfrey found 67 loyalty potions in Harry's blood at age 6 and arrested Dumbledore live in Wizengamot? Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1, The Blood That Screamed. The first thing healer Miriam Strout noticed when she apparated onto Privet Drive was how aggressively normal it looked. Every house was the same width. Every lawn was the same green. Every car in every driveway was the kind of car that said I made sensible choices and I'm fine with that. Number 4 had a particularly aggressive normalcy to it, the hedges trimmed to a military precision that felt almost like a threat. She'd been dispatched by the Accidental Magic Registry. A surge had lit up the monitoring board at the ministry like someone had thrown a torch into a fireworks factory, raw, uncontrolled, and enormous for a child this age. The registry flagged it as a 6-year-old. She'd expected a toddler who'd accidentally turned the cat blue. She knocked on the door. The woman who answered had a neck like a giraffe and eyes that were already hostile before Miriam had opened her mouth. Behind her, pressed flat against the hallway wall like he was trying to become part of it, was a very small boy with very large glasses held together with sellotape, and a bruise along his left cheekbone that Miriam's healer training clocked in about half a second. "Mrs. Dursley," Miriam said, keeping her voice pleasant. "We don't want any." The woman, Petunia, the file said, Petunia Dursley née Evans, started to close the door. Miriam put her hand on it. "Not hard. Just enough." "I'm not selling anything," she said. "I'm here about your nephew. There was a significant magical event at this address approximately 40 minutes ago. I need to assess the child." Petunia Dursley's face went through several expressions very quickly. Fear was one of them. But underneath that, briefly, was something that looked like relief, and that was the one that made Miriam's stomach tighten. "He's in the kitchen," Petunia said, and stepped back. The boy against the wall watched Miriam with green eyes that were startlingly clear and startlingly old for a face that small. He didn't move when she came in. Didn't flinch, which was almost worse. Children usually reacted to strangers. This one just watched her with the focused, measuring attention of someone who had learned very early that new people required immediate assessment. "Hello," Miriam said, crouching down to his level. "I'm Miriam. I'm a healer. Are you Harry?" "Yes," he said. "Are you hurt?" A pause. Brief, but there. "No," he said. Miriam looked at the bruise. Looked back at him. He held her gaze without blinking. "Okay," she said, because pushing in a hallway with his aunt 4 feet away was not the right move. "Can you show me where the magic happened? The big burst of it?" He glanced at his aunt. Something passed across his face, a careful, practiced neutrality, and then he pushed off the wall and walked down the hallway toward the kitchen. Miriam followed. The kitchen had a linoleum floor and a small cot pushed under the stairs. She could see the edge of it through the cupboard door that wasn't quite closed, could see the thin blanket, the single pillow, and she made herself keep her face very still and walk forward into the room like she hadn't noticed any of it. The window above the sink was shattered outward. Not broken inward, the way it would look if something had hit it from outside. Outward. The glass had exploded into the garden. On the floor near the stove was a frying pan, and beside the frying pan was a scorch mark, and the scorch mark was in the exact shape of a child's 2 handprints pressed flat against linoleum. Harry stood in the middle of the room and looked at the window like it had disappointed him. "I didn't mean to," he said. It was reflexive, that sentence. It came out with the flatness of something said so many times it had worn grooves into the tongue. "I know," Miriam said. She looked at the handprints. She looked at the frying pan. She looked at the boy. Her voice came out even because she was a professional and professionals kept their voices even when they wanted to put their fist through a wall. "Harry, I'd like to do a quick health check. Just a standard scan. Is that all right?" He shrugged. Which was not quite a yes, but was also the shrug of a child who had learned that his yes or no rarely changed anything. Miriam pulled out her wand and ran the standard diagnostic, the pale green light that tracked vital signs, bone density, nutritional markers. She watched the light. She kept her face still. The results bloomed in the air in front of her in faint diagnostic script, and she read them once, then read them again, because the first time she thought she'd miscounted. The malnourishment flags she'd already expected. The healed fractures in 2 fingers of his right hand she'd already half expected. The vitamin deficiencies, the sleep disruption markers, the elevated cortisol readings consistent with long-term stress, she had not expected the potion markers. They showed up as a separate column in the diagnostic, because potions in the bloodstream were a medical concern separate from physical health, things like prescribed potions, accidental ingestion, controlled substance monitoring. They glowed a different shade of green, slightly more yellow, and there were so many of them that the diagnostic script had actually run out of standard column space and started wrapping. Miriam counted. She counted again. 67. 67 distinct potion signatures in the bloodstream of a 6-year-old child who had never attended school, never held a wand, never set foot in the wizarding world except for the first 16 months of his life. She straightened up very slowly. She turned so Harry couldn't see her face. She looked at the scorch marks on the linoleum and breathed through her nose. "Harry," she said, "I'd like to take you to St. Mungo's for a proper checkup. There are a few things I want to look at more carefully. Would that be okay?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Do I have to come back here?" he asked. The question was asked quietly, without drama, without visible hope or visible despair. It was a genuine logistical inquiry, and it was the saddest sentence Miriam Strout had heard in 11 years of healing. "Not today," she said. He nodded and said, "Okay then." St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries occupied a building in central London that Muggle passers-by couldn't see, and the healer intake ward on the 3rd floor smelled of dittany and mild antiseptic and the particular papery smell of forms that needed filling out in triplicate. Miriam bypassed intake entirely and went straight to the diagnostic lab, which required a senior authorization she technically didn't have for a non-emergency case, but she flashed her credentials at the receptionist with the energy of someone who was absolutely not taking no for an answer, and the receptionist, reading that energy correctly, buzzed her through. Harry sat on the examination table and looked around the lab with his careful, cataloging eyes. He'd been silent in the flue, silent in the corridors. Not frightened, just observing. Taking stock. Miriam had caught him studying the moving portraits in the admissions hall with the focused attention of a scholar, not a scared child. She pulled up the full diagnostic array, the proper one, not the field scan. The kind that took 20 minutes and produced results you could take to court. "This might tingle," she told him. "'S'all right," he said. The array hummed and spun its golden diagnostic threads around him like a slow, luminous spider web. Miriam turned to the results panel and started reading, and after 30 seconds she sat down in the nearest chair because her legs had decided they were done. The standard diagnostics confirmed and expanded what she'd found on Privet Drive. But the potion analysis was where the array truly distinguished itself, because unlike the field scan, it didn't just identify that potions were present, it identified them. Named them. Dated them, roughly, by degradation profile. And most critically, it identified what they were keyed to. Loyalty Potion, Type 3, Dumbledore, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian. Administered approximately age 1.5 years. Degraded to 34% efficacy. Loyalty Potion, Type 3, Dumbledore, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian. Administered approximately age 2 years. Degraded to 41% efficacy. Loyalty Potion, Type 7, Dumbledore, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian. Administered approximately age 2.5 years. Degraded to 52% efficacy. The list went on. And on. And on. 67 entries, stacked like geological strata, administered at regular intervals across the entire span of Harry Potter's life. Some had faded to near nothing. The most recent ones, the Type 9 variants, which Miriam recognized as the most sophisticated loyalty formulations available, were still operating at 78% efficacy. And they were all keyed to the same person. Every single one. Miriam sat very still for a moment. Then she looked at Harry, who was watching a diagnostic light trace a slow circle around his wrist with mild curiosity. She thought about what 67 loyalty potions meant. What they did to a developing personality, a developing will. She thought about a child growing up not knowing which of his feelings were his own, not knowing that the instinct to trust, to defer, to fundamentally believe in the goodness of one particular man was not a natural feeling but a manufactured one, drip-fed into his blood with such regularity that his own magical core had partially adapted around it. She thought about that for about 45 seconds. Then she picked up the communication mirror on the wall and said, "Get me Amelia Bones. Director of the DMLE. Yes, right now. Tell her Chief Healer Pomfrey is calling from the diagnostic lab." She paused, registering the receptionist's confusion. Pomfrey. Pomfrey. She'll know the name. Tell her it's urgent. Tell her I've found something in a child's blood work that she needs to see tonight. She looked back at Harry. He had stopped watching the diagnostic light. He was watching her instead, with those impossibly clear green eyes, and there was something in his expression, something careful and newly attentive, that suggested he understood that something had just shifted. That this was a before and after. That the world on this side of this moment was going to be different from the world on the other side. "Am I in trouble?" he asked. "No," Miriam said. "Absolutely not. You are not in any trouble at all." She paused. "Are you hungry?" He looked at her like the question was a trick. "It's not a trick," she said. "There's a cafe on the second floor. They do a very good toasted cheese." He thought about it with the gravity of a small philosopher. "Yes," he said. "I'm quite hungry actually." "Right," said Miriam Strout, who was going to hold herself together because Harry Potter needed someone to hold themselves together, and then she was going to go home and fall absolutely apart. "Let's get you fed, and then some people are going to come and talk to us, and everything is going to be fine." It was the first time she'd promised a patient something she wasn't sure she could deliver. She meant it anyway. Poppy Pomfrey arrived at St. Mungo's at 9:30 that evening. She was not, technically, on staff at St. Mungo's yet. She wouldn't officially take up the Hogwarts school healer post for another 2 years. But she had consulting privileges, she had a reputation that opened doors in front of her like they were afraid to stay closed, and when Miriam Strout's message reached her through the mirror network, the phrase child's blood work, urgent, and the name Pomfrey were enough to get her through the building and into the diagnostic lab in 30 minutes flat. Miriam met her in the corridor outside the lab. Harry was inside, asleep on the examination table. Miriam had conjured a proper blanket, and someone from the pediatric ward had donated a pillow, and the lab was dim and quiet through the small window in the door. "Show me," Pomfrey said, before Miriam had opened her mouth. Miriam handed her the diagnostic printout. Poppy Pomfrey had been a healer for 19 years. She had worked in conflict zones during the First Voldemort War. She had treated dark curse damage that left other healers sick with nightmares. She was not a woman who frightened easily, or who expressed alarm without careful consideration. She read the printout in silence. She turned the page. She read the second page. She went back and read the first page again. Then she folded the printout very precisely along its original fold lines, tucked it into the inside breast pocket of her robe, and said, in a voice that was absolutely level, "Where is the child now?" "Sleeping. Lab 3. I've put a mild calming charm on the room, not on him," Miriam added quickly, "just ambient. The sound and the lights." "Good." Pomfrey looked through the window. Harry was curled on his side, glasses folded on the examination table beside him, one hand loosely fisted against the pillow. He looked, Poppy thought, terrifyingly small. Has anyone else seen this report? No. I went straight to you. Did you contact Dumbledore? The word landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. No, Miriam said quietly. That's why I called you first. Poppy looked at her for a long moment. Good girl, she said. Which was perhaps not the most collegial thing to say to a fellow healer, but Miriam was 26 and Poppy was 45, and in this particular moment the distance between those two facts felt significant and affectionate rather than condescending. Miriam seemed to understand that, because she just nodded. I need the original sample sealed and secured under a witness protocol, Poppy said, slipping into the clipped efficiency of someone making a plan. The diagnostic array records, the raw data files, not just the printout. I need them copied, witnessed, and stored in the healer client archive. That makes them legally protected and inaccessible without a court order even to the patient's designated guardian. She paused. Who is listed as Harry's designated guardian in his file? Miriam's jaw tightened fractionally. Albus Dumbledore. There was a silence. Change that tonight, Poppy said. Temporary Emergency Medical Guardian, Miriam Strout, Chief Attending. Standard Child Protection Protocol. The paperwork takes 8 minutes and it is completely legal and completely within your authority as the treating healer of record. She held Miriam's gaze. Do it before anyone else comes through that door. Right. Miriam was already moving. And Bones? I'm calling her myself, Poppy said. She pulled out her personal communication mirror, not the hospital's, which could be monitored, and spoke quietly but with the directness of someone who had earned the right to use a person's first name on short notice. Amelia. It's Poppy. I need to see you in person. Tonight. St. Mungo's Diagnostic Wing. Yes, I know what time it is. Bring your case robes. She heard the sound of a chair being pushed back from a desk on the other end of the mirror, and then Amelia Bones said, in a voice from which all social niceties had been stripped, how bad? Poppy looked at the sleeping child through the window. Amelia, she said, bring the case robes. Amelia Bones was head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement because she was the kind of person who read every page of every file, who remembered the name of every victim she'd ever prosecuted for, and who had a quality that she would have described as stubbornness and everyone who worked under her would have described, more accurately, as an absolute refusal to look away from inconvenient truths. She arrived at St. Mungo's in dark blue working robes with her case satchel over her shoulder and her square jaw set in an expression that suggested she was ready for something bad and merely waiting to learn the specific dimensions of it. Poppy handed her the diagnostic report in the corridor outside Lab 3. Amelia read it. She was faster than Poppy had been. Amelia read the way she did everything else, efficiently and thoroughly. She finished the second page, flipped back to the first, found the section she was looking for, and read 3 specific lines again. 67, she said. 67 confirmed distinct administrations, Poppy said. The array distinguishes between potion types. You can see on page 2, there are 11 different formulations, ranging from a basic type 3 all the way up to a type 9. The type 9 is black market designation, Amelia, it's not available through any licensed potioneer. The type 9 formulations are the ones still operating at high efficacy. How long has this been happening? From the degradation profiles and the dating methodology, which is accurate to within about 6 months, the first administration appears to have occurred when Harry was approximately 14 months old. Amelia's expression didn't change. But something behind her eyes went very quiet, the way a room goes quiet after a window breaks. He was 14 months old, Amelia said. Yes. And the most recent administration? Based on degradation, within the last 8 months. He's 6 years old, Amelia. He has been receiving regular administrations of loyalty-binding potions keyed to a specific individual since he was a year old. His developing magical core has been chemically influenced for virtually his entire life. Poppy's voice was steady because she had decided it would be steady, and Poppy Pomfrey's decisions about how she would be tended to stick. The physical effects are documented as well. Malnourishment. Historical fractures. Developmental suppression consistent with long-term stress exposure. And the magical suppression, Amelia, a child this age, particularly one with a core this size, should be registering accidental magic events regularly. His file shows none. None. The last documented accidental magic before tonight was age 2. The potions were broad enough that they were partially suppressing his magic as a side effect. Amelia set the report down. She pressed her fingertips to the bridge of her nose for exactly 3 seconds. Then she lowered her hand, and her face was the face of someone who had moved past shock into something cleaner and colder and more purposeful. "Tell me about tonight's incident," she said. "The frying pan," Miriam said quietly. She'd been standing against the wall, present but unobtrusive. "The Desley woman," she raised it at him. His magic responded. Blew out the kitchen window and sent the pan into the wall. Based on the scorch signature I documented, the force output was approximately equivalent to a moderate-level adult blasting hex. She paused. From a 6-year-old. Under potion suppression. The three of them sat with that for a moment. "What happens when you flush the potions?" Amelia asked. Poppy hesitated for the first time. "That's the question I've been sitting with for the last 2 hours. A standard cleansing protocol will remove the active potion compounds. The loyalty keying will dissolve. But 67 administrations over 5 years, there will be residual neural pathways. Conditioned responses. We're not flipping a switch back. He'll have feelings, preferences, loyalties that were artificially created and that he won't immediately be able to distinguish from genuine ones. It'll take time, and it will take," she chose her word carefully, "space. From the person those potions were keyed to. And his magic?" "I think," Poppy said, "that when you remove chemical suppression from a core that size, you are going to see something very significant." Amelia looked through the small window at the sleeping boy. The corridor was quiet. Somewhere in the building, a lift hummed. A clock on the wall moved its second hand around with soft, regular clicks. "I want to open a full criminal investigation," Amelia said. "Child endangerment. Illegal potion administration. Abuse of guardianship authority. Magical suppression of a minor." She paused. "And conspiracy, because 67 administrations at regular intervals does not happen without infrastructure. Without supply. Without sustained, deliberate intent." Her voice was even and hard as poured steel. "This was not carelessness, Poppy. This was a program." "I know," Poppy said. "The primary subject of this investigation," Amelia looked at the diagnostic printout one more time, at the column of names all reading the same way, "is Albus Dumbledore." "I know," Poppy said. Amelia picked up her satchel. "I need to wake up 2 Aurors I trust absolutely. I need to get a court-sealed copy of this diagnostic to a secure ministry archive before morning, independently of the Wizengamot records because Dumbledore has Wizengamot access. I need to arrange for the boy's current guardians," she said it with a tone that made the words sound like something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe, "to be formally assessed by Muggle social services, who will find more than enough to act on without any magical assistance from us. And I need to," she stopped herself. "What?" Pomfrey asked. "I need to not walk into St. Mungo's diagnostic lab and wake up a 6-year-old at 10:30 at night to tell him that the man who has effectively managed his entire existence has been poisoning him since infancy," Amelia said. "That conversation will happen, but it will happen properly. In daylight. With him fed and rested and with someone he trusts present." "He doesn't really trust anyone yet," Miriam said quietly. He's very careful. Very self-contained. I think the potions have done a strange thing, actually. They keyed loyalty to Dumbledore, but Dumbledore has never been present. So the loyalty was there as a kind of orientation. A North Star he's never actually seen. He's not attached to anyone at the Dursley house. He's just, she searched for the word, surviving. They all looked at the sleeping child. He's going to be very angry, Poppy said. Not with dread. With something that sounded, if you listened carefully, almost like quiet approval. When this settles and the potion's clear and he understands what was done, he's going to be furious. Good, said Amelia Bones. Morning came into Lab 3 through a high window, pale and grey gold, and Harry Potter woke up the way he always woke up, instantly, completely, and quietly, without the transition most people passed through between sleeping and being awake. He'd learned to wake that way. At the Dursleys, being slow to wake up had costs. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, recalibrating. Not home. Not the cupboard. The ceiling was high and white and had faint luminescent traces in it that he suspected were magical. They pulsed very slowly, about once every 4 seconds, in a way that looked like breathing. He watched them. He breathed with them. His glasses were on the table beside him and he put them on and the room sharpened. Lab 3. The woman called Miriam had told him that was where they were. She was sleeping in the chair in the corner, her head tipped sideways, her brown hair escaping the bun it had been in last night. Harry sat up carefully, so as not to wake her. His mind was different this morning. It was hard to articulate. He was 6, and he didn't have the vocabulary for neurochemistry or potion pharmacology, but he had very good instincts. He'd needed good instincts, at number 4, and the instinct said, something is clearing. Something is moving. Like a fog he hadn't known was there lifting at the edges, just slightly, just enough to see that there had been a fog at all. He felt, in a way he couldn't name, lighter. Not happy. He wasn't sure he knew quite what happy felt like in his own body without chemical assistance, but lighter. More himself. Whatever himself was. He slid off the examination table, feet hitting the cool floor, and padded to the window. London outside was just waking up. A pigeon sat on the opposite sill in a state of profound philosophical blankness. A Muggle double-decker went past the glamoured exterior of the building, the driver visible in the upper deck mirror, a thermos of something steaming on the dashboard. Harry watched it go. He thought about the woman called Miriam's face when she'd looked at the diagnostic results. She'd thought he hadn't noticed. He'd noticed. She'd gone very still, and then she'd looked at him with something in her expression that was different from the look adults at the Dursleys used, different from the careful blankness of people who had decided not to see him, different from Petunia's hostile wariness, different from Dudley's mean boredom. She had looked at him like he mattered. Like what the diagnostic said mattered. Like someone finding out about a wrong that should be put right. He hadn't had that look pointed at him before. He was still thinking about what to do with it. Behind him, Miriam stirred in the chair. He heard her intake of breath as she came awake and registered the empty examination table. "I'm here," he said, without turning around. "By the window." A pause. Then, "Oh, good. Sorry, I didn't mean to fall asleep." "It's fine." He turned around. "What happens today?" She blinked at him. He got that a lot, the blink. Adults weren't used to children asking direct questions without preamble. He'd found that the time other children spent crying or shouting or demanding comfort was better spent asking the question you actually needed answered. "Today," Miriam said carefully, "some people are going to come and talk to you. A woman named Amelia Bones, she's in charge of the part of the government that investigates when something wrong has been done. And Healer Pomfrey, who you met briefly last night. She's very kind. A bit fierce." "Are they going to tell me what was in my blood?" Harry asked. Miriam went still the way she had last night. Then she said, "Yes. They are." "Okay," Harry said. "Can we get the toasted cheese first?" "I think better when I've eaten." Miriam looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't quite categorize, something between heartbreak and something that was almost a smile. "Absolutely," she said. "Let's get you the toasted cheese." Poppy Pomfrey arrived at 8 and Amelia Bones arrived at 8:15, and by 8:30 they were all in a small family consultation room on the 4th floor, the kind of room with sofas instead of examination tables, and a bowl of sweets on the low table, and a window with actual curtains. Harry sat on the sofa nearest the door, which he'd chosen deliberately, and ate his second piece of toasted cheese and watched the two new adults settle themselves. Amelia Bones was not what he'd expected from a government person. She was square and solid and looked at him with the attention of someone who was genuinely listening before he'd said anything. Poppy Pomfrey was round and brisk, and her eyes were simultaneously kind and sharp in a combination that Harry, who had spent his life reading adult expressions, found immediately trustworthy. "Harry," Amelia said, "I'm going to explain something to you. It's complicated, and it's not fair, and you're allowed to feel however you feel about it. There are no wrong feelings. Okay?" "Okay," Harry said. "Do you know what a potion is?" "Like a medicine." "Yes, exactly. Or, like a substance that can change how your body or your mind works. You've been given potions, Harry. A lot of them. In your food, most likely, over a very long time, your whole life, really. Without your knowledge. Without your parents' knowledge." Harry was quiet for a moment. He took another small bite of toasted cheese. He was processing. "What kind of potions?" he asked. "Loyalty potions," Pomfrey said. She said it directly, without softening it, and Harry found he appreciated that. "They're illegal. Very illegal. What they do, what they did, is they created a feeling in you of trust and loyalty and devotion to a specific person. A feeling that felt natural. Like it was yours. But it wasn't, entirely. It was manufactured." "Who?" Harry asked. The two women exchanged a look. It was fast, but Harry caught it. "A man called Albus Dumbledore," Amelia said. Harry thought about that name. He turned it over. He'd heard it before, in hushed tones from Petunia, once or twice, with the particular bitterness she reserved for things magical. He didn't know the man. Had never met him, not that he could remember. And yet there was a thing in his chest. A warmth when he heard the name that he'd thought more actions right the next chapter now. Chapter 2, the weight of evidence. The cleansing potion tasted like cold iron and pine resin and something faintly sweet underneath that made it almost worse, and Harry drank all of it in 3 steady swallows without making a face. Pomfrey watched him do it with the clinical attention of someone cataloging data and the softer attention of someone who was finding the data unexpectedly moving. "Most adults make a face," she said. "Doesn't help," Harry said, handing back the small glass vial. He sat for a moment, hands on his knees, taking stock. "How long before it starts working?" "The first effects within a few hours. Full clearance, a week, maybe 10 days. We'll do a daily dose." She made a note in his chart. "Tell me if anything feels strange." "Dizzy, confused, sudden strong emotions without a clear cause." "How will I know if the emotions are real or the potion clearing?" She looked at him over the top of her chart. "You'll know," she said. "Real emotions make sense. Even when they're uncomfortable, they connect to something. Potion clearing feels like weather. It passes through." Harry considered this. "Okay." He slid off the examination table and went to the window. It was afternoon now. They'd spent the morning doing paperwork, which was apparently what justice looked like in its early stages, a lot of forms in triplicate with official seals. Amelia had arrived with 2 aurors at 10 o'clock, both of whom were introduced only by first name, both of whom had the specific quality of utter reliability that Amelia Bones apparently used as a hiring criterion. They were called Frank and Dora, Frank being a broad, quiet man in his 40s and Dora being a young woman with vivid turquoise hair who had changed it to match the curtains when she'd noticed Harry looking at it, then changed it back, and then winked at him. He'd decided he liked Dora. The investigation, that was the word they were using now, openly, around him, had a shape to it that Harry could see even if he didn't understand all its parts. Amelia was the center, the organizing intelligence. Pomfrey was the medical authority, the one whose testimony on the diagnostic evidence would be unassailable. Frank and Dora were the operational arm, the people who secured evidence and interviewed witnesses and made sure nothing disappeared into the system before it could be used. Harry was still working out what Harry was. Not a victim. He didn't feel like a victim. He felt like someone who had been given information that reframed everything he knew about his own life, and he was reorganizing his internal files accordingly, and the reorganization was sharp and fast and not particularly comfortable but also not unbearable. He had always been good at uncomfortable truths. You got good at them when you grew up at number 4. Someone's coming at 3, Pomfrey said, not looking up from the chart. Someone who has been trying to reach you since last night, though they didn't know that was what they were doing. Harry turned from the window. Who? Sirius Black, Pomfrey said. And then, because his face was blank, he didn't recognize the name, not really, which told its own story about what the potions had and hadn't been designed to allow him. She added, your godfather. He had a godfather. He sat with that for a moment. He had a godfather and he hadn't known, because no one had told him, and probably no one had told him because the man whose name was on 67 loyalty potions had decided he didn't need to know, and the new, clearer part of Harry's thinking, the part that was not fogged with artificial devotion, found that extremely interesting and extremely telling. Where has he been? Harry asked. That, Pomfrey said, setting down her chart, is a story. And you should hear it properly. So when he arrives, I'll give you some privacy, but I want you to know, she looked at him with the focused sincerity she'd been directing at him since last night, the look that said you are worth being honest with, that his absence was not his choice. I want you to know that going in. Harry nodded slowly. What is he like? He asked. Pomfrey thought for a moment. Loud, she said. Brave. A bit reckless. He loves you very much, and he has never had the opportunity to do anything about it, and that has cost him considerably. She paused. He is also going to want to hug you. You don't have to let him. I'll assess when he arrives, Harry said, which made Pomfrey make a very small sound that was almost certainly a laugh she'd converted at the last second into a clearing of the throat. Sirius Black arrived at 3:05 looking like a man who had been standing outside the door for 4 minutes running different versions of this conversation through his head and arriving at the unsatisfying conclusion that no version was adequate. He was tall and dark-haired and needed a shave, and his eyes were grey and very bright and they found Harry the instant the door opened and then they just stayed there. Like they didn't want to look away in case Harry disappeared. Harry looked back at him with his standard careful assessment expression, and Sirius clearly didn't know what to do with that because his face went through 5 things very quickly: grief, love, guilt, something ferocious, something that was trying very hard to be calm for Harry's benefit and mostly not succeeding. Hi, Sirius said. Hello, Harry said. Sirius stood in the doorway. I don't really know how to start this. Pomfrey said you're my godfather. Yes. She said you've been somewhere. That you couldn't come before. That it wasn't your choice. Sirius exhaled. He came into the room and sat in the chair across from the sofa, which Harry appreciated. It kept the distance reasonable, gave him space, didn't crowd. Maybe Pomfrey had briefed him. Maybe he was just paying attention. Either way. I was in Azkaban, Sirius said. Prison. For 5 years. I was put there, his jaw tightened, without a trial. I was accused of being a Death Eater, of betraying your parents. I didn't do either of those things. But no one gave me the chance to say so. Harry thought about that. 5 years. He'd been 1 year old when this man went to prison. He'd been 6, living in a cupboard, while this man was somewhere else, also unable to leave, also trapped by someone else's decisions. How did you get out? Harry asked. The investigation. Something moved across Sirius's face, gratitude, maybe, or the particular feeling of someone who has been saved against all probability. When Bones opened the case on Dumbledore, when they started pulling at the threads, my file was one of the things that came up. I was out by Friday night. 2 days ago, Harry said. 2 days ago. He looked at Harry with that steady, bright-eyed intensity. I know you don't know me. I know you have no reason to trust me. I'm not asking you to. He stopped. Started again. Your mum was my best friend's wife and she was also she was extraordinary. And your dad was my brother, basically, in every way that counted. And when they died I should have, his voice cracked just slightly. He controlled it. I should have gotten to you sooner. A lot sooner. I'm sorry. Harry looked at him for a long moment. The thing that Pomfrey had said about real emotions making sense, about them connecting to something, he was testing that now, paying attention to his own responses. Was there a warmth here that felt manufactured, like the warmth he'd felt when he heard Dumbledore's name? Was this one of the artificial overlays? No. This was something different. This was recognition, maybe. The word Godfather landing in a place that felt suddenly like a door he hadn't known existed in a house he thought he knew completely. The Dursleys, Harry said I didn't have any family. Except them. Sirius's expression shifted into something hard and hot that he was very clearly containing for Harry's benefit. They were wrong, he said. I know that now, Harry said. He paused. Pomfrey said you might want to hug me. Sirius's expression did something complicated. Yes. But I won't, unless, okay, Harry said. He thought about it. He got up from the sofa and crossed the small room, and he let Sirius put his arms around him, and it was strange. He didn't have a large reference set for hugs. But there was something about the way Sirius held on that felt like it was doing as much for Sirius as for Harry, which made it a fair exchange, and Harry stood still in it for a few seconds before stepping back. Sirius looked at him with red-rimmed eyes and a slightly watery expression that he was absolutely not acknowledging. You're so like her, he said quietly. Your mum. The eyes, obviously. But, the way you think. The way you watch people. Was she like that? Very much. He cleared his throat. What happens next? Pomfrey said there's an investigation. Evidence. A hearing. Amelia Bones is building the case, Harry said. I'm going to testify. The diagnostic report is the center of it, 67 potions, all the same signature. But she says there's more. That this kind of thing has infrastructure. Supply chains. Sirius was looking at him the way adults had been looking at him since yesterday, with this particular expression of slightly stunned recalibration, like they'd come in expecting one thing and found another. Harry was used to it at this point. He'd been getting that look since he was old enough to ask questions that adults found inconveniently good. Harry, Sirius said slowly, how long have you been this? How old are you, exactly? 6. Right. Of course you are. He rubbed his jaw. How are you this? You know what, it doesn't matter. Are you safe here? Safest I've been, Harry said. Pomfrey is terrifying in a good way and Amelia Bones looks at people who lie to her like she's deciding which specific law they've broken. Sirius almost laughed. Yes. That's accurate. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I want to be involved. Whatever the investigation needs, whatever Harry needs, I want to be here. I know I have to earn that. I'm not asking you to automatically, you should talk to Amelia, Harry said. She'll want your testimony too. You were there, the night my parents died, after. You know things about Dumbledore and the order that she probably needs. Sirius stared at him. You'd already thought of that, Harry said. It wasn't a question. Actually, no, Sirius said. I'd been too busy trying not to fall apart in a hospital consultation room to think tactically. You're slightly ahead of me. Sorry, Harry said, not sounding particularly sorry. Don't apologize, Sirius said, and there was something fierce in his voice that Harry found he responded genuinely, not as a result of any chemical instruction. Don't ever apologize for being exactly who you are. The investigation moved the way good investigations did, fast in the places it could be fast, methodical in the places it needed to be methodical, and with the particular controlled urgency of people who knew that the subject of the investigation had enough institutional power to make evidence inconveniently disappear if given time. Amelia worked out of a temporary command post she'd established in the St. Mungo's administrative wing. She'd commandeered a conference room with the energy of someone who did not ask permission for things that needed doing and worried about the paperwork later. By the second day, it had maps on the walls and a secure FLU connection and a stack of sealed case files that grew visibly taller every time Harry walked past. He walked past fairly often. He found that being near the investigation was better than not being near it. Not because he needed reassurance, he'd stopped needing that kind of reassurance from circumstances very young, but because proximity meant information, and information meant he understood what was happening to him and around him, and understanding was the thing that made the difference between being caught in events and having some say in them. Amelia noticed. Of course she noticed everything. On the third day, she stopped him in the corridor and said, "Come in, then. If you're going to hover, you might as well be useful." So he sat in the corner of the command post on a chair that was slightly too tall for him and listened. The picture that emerged from the investigation was larger and more complex than 67 potions in one child's blood. It was, as Amelia had said that first night, a program. The potion supply had a chain. A licensed potioneer named Mundungus Fletcher, who was unlicensed in the ways that mattered, had been procuring the raw ingredients, but the formulations themselves, particularly the Type 9 variants, the sophisticated ones, had come from a source that took Frank 2 days to trace. A private laboratory in Edinburgh, registered under a subsidiary name that pointed, after 3 corporate veils, to a Hogwarts Board of Governors slush fund that predated Dumbledore's headmastership but had been significantly expanded under it. The administration chain was simpler. The Dursleys. Petunia Dursley, who had been given precise instructions, written in Dumbledore's hand, which the analysis would confirm, detailing what to add to specific foods and beverages and when, and why it was necessary, and why Harry must never know, and why she must never question. She had complied. Whether from fear or genuine belief in the necessity, she had complied, and that compliance made her complicit, and when Frank knocked on her door on the second morning with the documentation in his hand, her face had the hollow look of someone whose guilty secret has finally arrived at the front door. She didn't confess immediately. But she kept the letters. Poppy had said that was almost universal. People who were given authority to do terrible things to children almost always kept the paperwork that authorized it, because the paperwork was the thing that let them sleep. So they had the letters, in Dumbledore's handwriting, with his instructions, and the letters were forensically dated and sealed and put into the evidence archive, and that was the day the case moved from substantial to airtight. Harry was in the command post when Frank brought in the copies. He read them. Amelia let him read them, which he appreciated. She didn't soften them or summarize them or hand him a child-appropriate version. She put them in front of him and let him read. The letters were precise. Clinical. They explained, in Dumbledore's characteristic careful prose, the prose of a man who had thought about everything and decided everything in advance and was simply now informing others of the conclusions he'd reached, why Harry must be kept isolated, why his magical development must be moderated, why loyalty to Albus Dumbledore was a necessary precondition for Harry's future role, why the potions were not cruelty but preparation, why what felt like imprisonment was actually protection, why Petunia should trust the process, as he trusted the process, because the end they were working toward was necessary and worth any cost. The end they were working toward. Harry read that line 3 times. Then he set the letter down. "What end?" he said. Amelia looked at him. "He talks about a future role," Harry said. "He talks about an end." A purpose. What was I supposed to be for? The room was quiet. Frank was looking at the map on the wall. Dora had stopped what she was doing and was watching Harry with an expression that was carefully controlled. Amelia said, "We believe, and this is partly from Sirius's testimony, and partly from documents we're still processing, that Dumbledore had a plan for Voldemort. For defeating him permanently. And Harry, you were central to that plan. From birth. Possibly from before birth. He was going to use me," Harry said. "He was going to use you," Amelia confirmed. She said it cleanly, without softening. Harry sat with that. Outside the window, London moved through its afternoon, indifferent and enormous. A bus went past. Someone on a bicycle rang their bell at someone else. The completely normal machinery of the world that had no idea that in a hospital conference room, a 6-year-old boy was rearranging his entire understanding of his own existence. "Does he know you've started the investigation?" Harry asked. "We don't believe so. We've been very careful about information containment." "He'll find out," Harry said. "He's smart. He has sources." He tapped his finger on the armrest of his chair. "You need to move faster than he can react. Whatever the next step is, the hearing, the arrest, whatever, it needs to happen before he has time to start countering." Amelia and Frank exchanged a look. "We're aware of that," Amelia said. "I can help with the testimony," Harry said. "I know it doesn't seem like I'd have much, I've never met him. But the potions themselves are my testimony. The clearance process is documented. The before and after. That's evidence. And I can stand in front of a Wizengamot and tell them what it felt like to have someone else's feelings in my head and not know it. That's not nothing." "No," Amelia said quietly. "It's not nothing at all." On the 4th day, Harry's magic started showing. It hadn't been exactly absent before, the kitchen window on Privet Drive had been that. But it had been reactive, suppressed, bursting out only under significant duress. As the cleansing potion did its work, as the chemical weights lifted layer by careful layer, the magic that had been pressing against its constraints began to simply exist. Naturally. The way a river exists when you remove the dam a little at a time. It started small. The lights in Lab 3 brightened when he walked in from a bad dream at 2 in the morning, brightened smoothly and evenly to exactly the level he would have chosen, without him touching a switch. A cup of tea Miriam poured for him was the precise temperature he wanted it by the time it reached his hand, despite having started too hot. A book he reached for across the room came to him. By day 5, it was less small. He was in the consultation room with Sirius. They'd been spending 2 hours each afternoon together, which was Sirius's idea and Harry's cautious, ongoing experiment in what it felt like to have someone in your corner, when Sirius made a joke that Harry found genuinely funny, and Harry laughed, and the lamp in the corner of the room threw sparks for approximately 3 seconds before subsiding. Not dangerous sparks. Celebratory ones, almost, like tiny fireworks. Sirius stared at the lamp. "Does that happen often?" he asked. "More every day," Harry said, watching the last sparks settle. "Does it bother you?" Harry considered. "No," he said. "It feels correct. Like something that was held back being allowed to move." Sirius watched him with the particular expression he got sometimes, part wonder, part grief, part fierce protective love, and then he said, quietly, "Your mum's magic was like that. Responsive. Like it was listening." He paused. "Your dad's was different, his was big and bright and very noticeable. But your mum's was aware. Like it was paying attention to everything around her." Harry looked at his hands. He turned them over. "I want to learn," he said. "Properly. Not wait for Hogwarts. I want to learn now." Sirius was nodding before he'd finished the sentence. "I know someone," he said. "A private tutor. Absolutely trustworthy. If Amelia clears it, gives you some time outside the hospital, we could start immediately. Ask her, Harry said. He looked at his hands again. Something was moving under his skin, not literally, but in that way magic sometimes manifested to its owner before it manifested to the world. Something large and patient and entirely his, that had been waiting. He was done waiting. On day 6, Pomfrey sat down with him and told him about the Wizengamot hearing. She explained the structure, a full session of 50 wizarding judges, plus the chief warlock seat, currently Dumbledore's seat, which was a detail that Amelia had already petitioned to have suspended for the duration of the proceedings. She explained how testimony was given, how evidence was presented, how the vote to bring formal charges worked. He'll be there, Harry said. Yes. He'll argue his case himself? Almost certainly. Pomfrey's voice was even. He is, I want to prepare you for this, Harry, he is extraordinarily persuasive. He has spent decades building a reputation as the greatest wizard of his age, the chief defender of the light, the man who knows better than anyone else what must be done to protect the wizarding world. Many of the Wizengamot members believe in him absolutely. He will stand in that chamber and he will be compelling. But the evidence is real, Harry said. The evidence is unimpeachable. And I'll testify. She looked at him carefully. Are you sure? You can provide a written statement, I'll testify in person, Harry said. I want to be in the room. Pomfrey studied him. Why? It was a genuine question, and he gave it genuine thought. Because, he said slowly, he made 67 decisions about my life that I wasn't in the room for. I want to be in the room for this one. Poppy Pomfrey had been a healer for 19 years. She had held patients' hands while they received the worst news of their lives. She had been present at more human moments than most people witnessed in 3 lifetimes. She was not easily moved. She was moved now. All right, she said. The day before the hearing, Narcissa Malfoy sent a letter. It arrived through official ministry channels, routed through Amelia's office, opened and screened by Frank, and it was addressed not to Amelia but to Harry. Which was irregular. Which was, Harry suspected, precisely the point. It was short. Mr. Potter, I have information pertaining to the supply chain of the potions used in your treatment. This information is not in the documents already in evidence. I am prepared to provide it, without condition, in exchange for a private 10-minute meeting before the Wizengamot session tomorrow. I have no particular loyalty to Albus Dumbledore. I have a considerable loyalty to the preservation of my family, and the current political landscape suggests that those two loyalties are no longer compatible. I will be in the 4th-floor cafe at St. Mungo's at 7 o'clock this evening. And Malfoy Harry read it. He handed it to Amelia. She read it and pressed her lips together. You don't have to meet with her, Amelia said. What information could she have that we don't? She married into the inner circle. If Dumbledore had a relationship with the Death Eater supply networks, if the loyalty potion program extended beyond just you, she might know the edges of it. We meet with her, Harry said. Amelia looked at him. The investigative instinct on you is genuinely alarming, she said, which was clearly a compliment. 7 o'clock, Harry said. I want to be there. You are 6 years old, and I have a letter addressed to me, not to you, Harry said pleasantly. 7 o'clock. The silence that followed was Amelia Bones deciding which hill to die on. 7 o'clock, she said. Narcissa Malfoy was precisely what Harry had expected from the handwriting, cool and exact and dressed in pale grey robes that were expensive in the way that didn't need to announce itself. She was beautiful in the severe, architectural way that certain people were beautiful, and her eyes were the blue of deep winter and very intelligent. She looked at Harry across the café table, and if she was surprised by him, 6 years old, 2 big clothes, glasses slightly crooked, she showed absolutely none of it. Mr. Potter, she said. Mrs. Malfoy, Harry said. Amelia sat to his left. Frank was by the door. Sirius, who had almost certainly needed to be actively restrained from coming in with his wand drawn, was outside in the corridor. He'd been briefed on Narcissa Malfoy and had expressed his opinion with several words that Pomfrey had told him were inappropriate in front of a 6-year-old, to which Sirius had responded that Harry was clearly not a standard 6-year-old, to which Pomfrey had not had an immediate counter. "You have information," Harry said. "I do." Narcissa folded her hands on the table. "What I am about to tell you is voluntarily given. I am not seeking immunity. I am not seeking recognition. I am seeking, the faintest pause, a future in which my family is not standing on the wrong side of history." "Talk," Amelia said. Narcissa looked at her briefly, then back at Harry, which Harry found interesting. "The Type 9 loyalty potion," she said, "the most advanced formulation used on you, the one currently operating at the highest efficacy, was not developed by any commercial or black market potioneer. It was developed by a man named Horace Slughorn, who was potions master at Hogwarts for 30 years under Dumbledore's tenure and who has been in what Dumbledore calls comfortable retirement in the countryside but is functionally under protective supervision." "Meaning Dumbledore has something on him," Amelia said. "Meaning Dumbledore has the original formulation notebooks in his possession, which contain evidence of several other potions Slughorn developed privately over the years." "Insurance." Narcissa's voice was perfectly level. Slughorn was aware of the general application of the Type 9 formula. He did not know specifically that it was being used on a child. "That is not exculpatory, he is culpable for the development and it will need to be addressed. But it means he has motive to testify." "And you know this how?" Amelia asked. "Because my husband was informed of the supply chain when he provided a significant financial contribution to what Dumbledore called, a very slight tightening around her eyes, the Greater Good Foundation. Which is not a registered charity." "Financial records," Amelia said, sitting forward. "Which I have brought," Narcissa said, and placed a sealed folder on the table. Harry looked at the folder. He looked at Narcissa. "Why me?" he asked. "The letter was addressed to me, not to the director." "Why?" Something shifted in Narcissa's cool expression. "Very briefly." "Because you," she said carefully, "are the reason this particular house of cards is finally falling. And because," another pause, "this one less controlled, I have a son. He is 4 years old. And when I look at the diagnostic report that has been circulating among certain ministry circles, when I see 67 administrations on a child who was a year old, I find that certain long-standing political accommodations become very difficult to maintain." The cafe was quiet around them. Teacups clinked somewhere. A healer laughed with a colleague at the counter. "Thank you," Harry said. Narcissa Malfoy looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once, gathered herself, and stood. "Tomorrow," she said to Amelia. "The session." "Tomorrow," Amelia confirmed. She left. Harry watched her go and then looked at the sealed folder on the table. "That's enough," he said. "Isn't it? That's enough for what we need." "That," Amelia said, picking up the folder, "is considerably more than enough." Harry leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. Tomorrow was the Wizengamot. Tomorrow, Albus Dumbledore was going to walk into a session he believed he controlled, and find that the architecture of that control had been quietly, carefully, thoroughly dismantled. Outside the cafe window, London moved through its evening without any sense of occasion. Harry thought about 67. About a 14-month-old baby who'd been given the first dose. About the person that baby had been before any of it started, and the person he was now, 5 days into becoming himself for the first time, and the person he was going to be after tomorrow. He didn't know yet, entirely, what that person looked like. He was looking forward to finding out. Chapter 3, The Wizengamot Burns. The Ministry of Magic at 7 in the morning had the particular atmosphere of a building that knew something was about to happen and was pretending very hard that it didn't. Harry noticed it the moment they stepped out of the flue into the atrium. The usual morning traffic of ministry workers, witches and wizards crossing the golden floor, memos zooming overhead in their crisp paper formations, had a tightness to it. A just slightly too deliberate quality. People were moving with their eyes down, which meant they were paying more attention than usual to their peripheral vision. The enchanted fountain in the center threw its golden spray upward, and the figures in it, the witch, the wizard, the centaur, the goblin, looked, in the strange morning light, less triumphant than they usually did. Or maybe Harry was just reading the room. He was wearing his best clothes, which were still too large because they were Dudley's, and Sirius had tried to do something about that at 6 this morning with a resizing charm that had improved things marginally. His glasses were straight. Pomfrey had fixed them last night, quietly, without ceremony, just taken them off his face and handed them back 30 seconds later with both lenses intact and the frame no longer held together with sellotape. He walked beside Amelia, slightly behind her left shoulder, which was the position he'd worked out gave him the best vantage point without being in anyone's way. Sirius was on his other side. Pomfrey walked ahead with Frank, who had the sealed evidence case under his arm. Dora flanked the group, and Harry noticed she'd made her hair dark and unremarkable today, which was either professional instinct or a deliberate choice to be less memorable in a crowd, and either way he approved. They took the lift down. The Wizengamot chambers were on the 9th level, and the lift descent had the specific quality of irrevocable commitment, the kind that came when an action was in motion and the only variable left was how it landed. Harry felt it in his chest, not as fear, but as a sharpening. Everything more vivid. The brass numbers ticking past. The slight tremor of the lift cables. Sirius beside him, breathing steadily but with a jaw that was too set for someone who was calm. "You've been here before," Harry said to him. Sirius looked at him sideways. "Yeah. Under substantially less pleasant circumstances. When they sent you to Azkaban. Didn't even make it to a courtroom that time," Sirius said. "Just, straight to the Dementors. No stops." He said it with the particular flatness of someone who has processed an event sufficiently to be able to state it plainly but not sufficiently to feel nothing about it. "That was Dumbledore's influence," Harry said. "Wasn't it? The no trial. Someone had to have cleared that." Sirius looked at him. "You know, most people spend years figuring that out." "I had a fast week," Harry said. The lift opened. The Wizengamot chamber was underground and enormous, with tiered stone benches rising in a semicircle around a central floor that was lit from above by an enchanted ceiling that mimicked the sky. This morning, somewhat appropriately, it was an overcast gray with a suggestion of pressure behind it, as though rain was being considered. The 50 members who made up the full Wizengamot were filing in through the side entrances, their plum-colored robes with the silver W settling into the tiers like a murmuration of formal birds. Harry walked in with Amelia's group through the prosecution entrance, which was at the floor level, and he looked up at the chamber as they entered and felt, not small, despite the geometry of the room being specifically designed to make people at the center of it feel small, alert. Ready. The room was built for authority to speak downward at individuals below. He'd spent 6 years in a house built on that same principle. He was done being impressed by architecture. The chief warlock's chair at the apex of the chamber was empty. It would stay empty for this session. Amelia had gotten a suspension through on an emergency judicial grounds petition at 11 the previous night, and whoever had tried to block it at the last minute had found the paperwork airtight. Dumbledore, then, would be in the chamber as a member of the Wizengamot, not as its head. One plum-robed figure among 50. And then, at a specific point in the proceedings, he would not be a member at all. Harry took a seat at the central testimony table. He'd been offered a higher platform, a more formal position, but he'd looked at it and said no. He wanted to be at floor level. He wanted to be able to look up at the tiers and also to turn and be looked at directly, no barriers. Amelia took her position at the prosecution stand. The chamber filled. And then Albus Dumbledore walked in. Harry had built a picture of him. You couldn't avoid it. The man appeared in the evidence constantly, his name in the documents, his handwriting in the letters, his decisions in every layer of the diagnostic printout. You accumulated a sense of someone from that kind of evidence, a silhouette. Harry's silhouette had been, powerful, deliberate, cold underneath the warmth, fundamentally convinced of his own rightness. The actual man was harder to reconcile with that. Dumbledore was old. Very old, in the way that certain people were old who had seen so much that age had become something they wore rather than something that was happening to them. He was tall, with a long silver beard and half-moon spectacles and robes in deep blue that made him look like a particularly thoughtful painting. His eyes were blue and very bright, and they found Harry immediately when he entered, found him and stilled, just for a fraction of a second, before moving on with no visible alteration in his expression. That fraction of a second was everything. Because Harry had been expecting surprise. He'd been expecting Dumbledore to see him, to see the table, to see Amelia at the prosecution stand, and to experience the cognitive shock of a plan suddenly revealed to be compromised. He'd been expecting the half-second of disorientation that preceded all the moves Dumbledore would then make. What he saw instead was something that took him a moment to identify. Recognition. Not of Harry specifically, but of the situation. The shape of it. Dumbledore scanned the chamber, the filled tiers, the empty Chief Warlock's chair, Harry at the central table, Amelia at the prosecution stand, and his expression didn't crack. It didn't collapse. It became, if anything, more composed. More still. He already knew the general shape of what was coming. Not the specifics, he couldn't know the specifics or he'd have moved sooner, but the category of it. He'd been watching for this. Prepared for it. And he'd come anyway. Harry found that interesting. He found it more than interesting. He filed it carefully. Dumbledore took his seat in the tiers, in the row assigned to senior members, and folded his hands in his lap and looked at the chamber with the patient equanimity of a man at a performance he was confident would resolve in his favor. The session was called to order by the temporary chair, a small, precise witch named Augusta Longbottom, whose voice had the carrying quality of someone who had never in her life felt the need to shout because they were always sufficiently heard. This extraordinary session of the Wizengamot, Augusta said, has been convened under emergency judicial proceedings at the request of the Director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Director Bones, you may present. Amelia stood. She didn't use notes. Harry had watched her prepare for 3 days, and he understood now that the preparation had been the internalization of the material to the point where the notes were unnecessary. She spoke the way she moved, economically, with precision, each sentence carrying its full weight and not a syllable more. She laid it out cleanly. A child, brought to St. Mungo's. A diagnostic examination. 67 loyalty potions, keyed to a specific individual, administered across the full span of that child's life beginning at 14 months of age. The supply chain. The administration records. The letters, in the respondent's own hand, directing the administration. She named the respondent. The chamber moved. Not all at once, it rippled. Some members shifted. Some went absolutely still. A few looked at Dumbledore immediately, the instinctive response of people whose loyalty was pre-committed and who needed to see his face. A few looked at Harry. Augusta Longbottom looked at the evidence presentation board where Amelia had placed the diagnostic printout, and her expression did something complex and final. Dumbledore was still. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement brings charges, Amelia said, of illegal administration of controlled potions to a minor. Child endangerment. Criminal magical suppression. Abuse of guardianship authority. Conspiracy to commit the above across a sustained period. She paused. Respondent, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. The chamber erupted. It was not the volcanic eruption of complete shock. Too many people had already heard something, already felt the pressure of the morning, already registered the empty Chief Warlock's chair. It was the eruption of a thing that has been building, breaking the surface. Voices overlapping. Someone near the top of the tiers saying Dumbledore's name in the flat, blunt tone of a person who is having a fundamental conviction challenged. Someone else saying the boy, meaning Harry, meaning, who authorized this, who brought this here, who is responsible for this child being in this room? Augusta let it run for 10 seconds. Then she raised her wand and produced a single, sharp tone that cut across the noise like a blade. Silence. The charges have been entered, Augusta said. The respondent will be given the opportunity to address the chamber. The primary witness will testify. Votes will proceed in standard order. She looked at Dumbledore. Albus. You have the floor. Dumbledore stood. He moved with the unhurried gravity of a man who had addressed this chamber hundreds of times and had never once spoken from a position he considered weak. He turned slightly, so that he was addressing not just Augusta but the full arc of the tiers, the way a conductor positions themselves to reach the whole orchestra. And Harry understood, watching him, watching the chamber respond to him, the slight collective straightening, the attentive leaning forward, that this was the real heart of the obstacle. Not the evidence, which was real. Not the legal process, which was sound. But this. The man himself. Decades of trust. Decades of authority. Decades of being the voice that said I know what must be done and being right often enough that people had stopped asking for the working. My friends, Dumbledore said. His voice was warm and measured and carried in the stone chamber with the ease of long practice. I find myself in an extraordinary position today. Standing before this body to which I have dedicated 40 years of service, facing charges which, I will not pretend, carry significant legal weight, because the evidence Director Bones has presented is real. The chamber went very quiet. That admission had done something, cut a particular defense off before it could be mounted, established a kind of candor that immediately recalibrated the room's emotional temperature. The potions were administered. I authorized their administration. The child's diagnostic results are accurate. He looked across the tiers. I will not insult this chamber by disputing facts. He paused. The pause was architectural, it created a space that the next words would fill. What I will ask this chamber to consider, he said, is the context in which those decisions were made. Tom Riddle, whom you know as Lord Voldemort, was not destroyed on the night he attacked the Potter family. He was diminished. Reduced. Surviving in a form and by means that I will not detail in open session, because some of that information remains operationally sensitive, but surviving nonetheless. He will return. Not might, will. His voice was unchanged, still warm, still measured. When he does, he will be more dangerous than before, because defeat, even incomplete defeat, sharpens a mind like his. He looked at Harry then. Not with guilt. Not with cruelty. With something that was genuinely more unsettling than either, a kind of sorrowful, absolute certainty. Harry Potter, he said, is the only individual with the magical and circumstantial properties necessary to face that return. Not because I chose him arbitrarily. Because of a prophecy, a real one, witnessed, recorded, stored in the Department of Mysteries, that identified him before his birth. He turned back to the tiers. A 6-year-old child, raised in the Muggle world, with no knowledge of his heritage and no preparation for what he will face, is not safe. An unprepared Harry Potter facing Voldemort is a dead Harry Potter. And a dead Harry Potter means a return with nothing to stop it. He spread his hands slightly. The measures I took were not cruelty. They were calculation. Difficult, costly, morally complex calculation, undertaken for the protection of every person in this room and every magical person in this country. Silence. He sat down. And the silence had a texture to it, the texture of people who have just heard a compelling argument and are, at some level, finding it compelling. Harry waited 2 seconds. Then he stood up. He didn't ask for the floor. Augusta looked at him and something in her expression shifted, assessingly, then with a brief nod, and she said simply, the primary witness. Harry walked to the testimony position. It was designed for adults, the space and the sight lines, but he didn't try to compensate for that by standing straighter or positioning himself differently. He stood exactly as he was and looked up at the tiers. Professor Dumbledore said the measures he took were calculation, Harry said. His voice was clear and it carried, not with the practiced projection of someone who had learned oratory, but with the natural carry of a voice that was certain of what it was saying. I'd like to talk about what that calculation felt like from the inside. He paused. Not for drama. Just to think through the clearest order. I grew up at number 4, Privet Drive with my aunt and uncle. I slept in a cupboard under the stairs. I was fed less than my cousin. I wore his old clothes. 2 of the fingers on my right hand have fractures that were set badly and healed wrong. My medical records from St. Mungo's will confirm all of this. He said it without anger, in the same clear, direct tone. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you this because Professor Dumbledore placed me there. He chose that house. He wrote the letters directing my aunt on how to administer potions to me. He made those choices. He looked at Dumbledore. Directly. He said the potions weren't cruelty. He said they were preparation. Harry's voice was even. For 5 days I've been taking a cleansing potion. Every morning. And every morning, as the potion compounds clear, I feel something that Professor Dumbledore's letters describe as loyalty and trust, a specific, directed loyalty to a specific person, becoming less. Not disappearing entirely yet, because it takes time, but becoming less. He held the chamber's attention the way someone holds a flame, steadily, without gripping. When I heard Professor Dumbledore's name for the first time 2 days ago, I felt something warm. Something familiar. I thought it was recognition, because that's what it was designed to feel like. But it was a potion. It was a choice someone made about what I would feel before I was old enough to make choices. He turned back to the tiers. Professor Dumbledore said I'm necessary. That there's a prophecy. That I'm the only one who can face Voldemort. He let the name land, no flinch, no hesitation, the name of a bogeyman landing flat and clear in a chamber where half the people present still thought of it as unspeakable. I don't know if that's true. But here's what I know, the way to prepare someone to face something dangerous is not to poison them into compliance and put them in a cupboard. If you wanted a weapon, Professor Dumbledore, you should have raised a person. He stepped back from the testimony position. The chamber was absolutely silent. Then someone in the upper tier began to clap. Single, slow, deliberate. Then a second person. Then it was running around the tiers like a current, not unanimous. Some members sat stone still, arms folded, but enough. Enough that the sound of it was substantial. Real. Augusta let it run. Then the sharp tone again. Harry walked back to the central table and sat down. Sirius, who was in the gallery above, was leaning forward on the railing with an expression Harry felt more than saw, fierce and shattered and proud in equal measure. Dumbledore was watching Harry with the expression Harry had catalogued when he'd entered, the composed, still attention of a man who was processing new data against an existing model and making adjustments. He didn't look defeated. He looked like someone recalculating. That was what Harry had expected. That was, in fact, what he'd been counting on. The questioning of Dumbledore lasted 40 minutes. Amelia was precise and relentless in the way of someone who had the facts so thoroughly organized that she could walk him through each one like rooms in a house, each room smaller than the last, less air, less room to maneuver. The financial records from Narcissa's folder. The laboratory in Edinburgh. Slughorn's formulation notebooks. The administration letters. Dumbledore answered everything. He answered with the devastating consistency of a man who had decided that candor was his best remaining strategy, yes to the financial connection, yes to Slughorn's involvement, yes to each letter, yes to each decision. And each yes was followed by the same frame, necessary, protection, the greater good, Voldemort's return. It was, Harry thought, watching from the central table, almost admirable in its commitment. He was not going to pretend he hadn't done it. He was going to stand in it and insist that it was right. He was going to make this chamber argue not about facts but about values, because on the facts he had no ground and he knew it. 3 members of the Wizengamot spoke in his defense. Their arguments were variations of his: the threat of Voldemort was real, the prophecy was real, extreme times demanded extreme measures. One of them said, and Harry watched the chamber react to this with the specific fascination of someone watching a miscalculation happen in real time, that Harry Potter's discomfort during childhood was regrettable but within the acceptable parameters of the greater strategic necessity. The member who said this did not appear to have considered what it would look like to say it in the same room as the 6-year-old in question. Augusta Longbottom looked at that member with an expression that could have cured leather. The testimony and questioning phase closed. Augusta called for the preliminary vote, not a conviction vote, that would require a separate criminal trial, but the Wizengamot motion that mattered most today, the suspension of Dumbledore's titles, positions, and authority pending criminal proceedings. Chief Warlock. Supreme Mugwump. Order of Merlin designations. Members will vote, Augusta said. The motion is to suspend the titles and positions of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore pending full criminal investigation and trial. Voting is by declaration. We will go by tier. It went by tier. The first tier, the most senior, split 5-4 in favor. The second tier went 7-1 in favor, that was the tier where Augusta's associate sat. The third tier split almost evenly. The fourth tier, which held the younger members, was 6-0 in favor, 6 members declining to vote. Harry counted quietly. The final tally was 31 in favor of suspension, 14 against, 5 abstentions. 31-14. Augusta declared it carried. The chamber moved again, not the eruption of before, something different. The low, sustained sound of 46 people recalibrating their world. Some of them were looking at each other. Some were looking at Harry. A few were looking at Dumbledore with expressions ranging from betrayed to grim to carefully blank. Dumbledore himself sat in perfect stillness as Augusta's declaration settled over the room. His expression hadn't changed. He was looking at the empty Chief Warlock's chair above the apex of the chamber, his chair, which had been empty since this morning, and Harry couldn't quite read what was in his eyes. Not defeat. Not rage. Something older and quieter than either. Then his eyes moved to Harry, and Harry met them, and they looked at each other across the chamber floor. I want you to understand, Dumbledore said. He wasn't speaking to the chamber. He was speaking to Harry, directly, at a conversational volume that nonetheless carried in the now quiet room. What is coming, what will come, because it will come regardless of what this chamber decides today, was the reason for everything. Everything. I believe you believe that, Harry said. It was a careful sentence and Dumbledore recognized it as one. Something moved in his expression, respect, perhaps. The recognition of a mind that had processed his argument and declined it cleanly rather than failed to understand it. You're going to need help, Dumbledore said. More than Director Bones can provide. More than your godfather. What's coming requires, what's coming, Harry said, is my problem to face my way. Not yours. 2 Aurors were moving down the aisle toward Dumbledore's position. Not Dora, not Frank, the formal arrest Aurors, the ones in the full ceremonial robes who handled Wizengamot-level apprehensions. Dumbledore stood as they reached him. He allowed the binding restraints to be placed on his wrists with the dignified compliance of a man who had decided that resistance was beneath him. He looked, in that moment, genuinely ancient. You are not ready, he said quietly. It was not unkind. It was the conviction of a man who had decided a truth and built an architecture around it that nothing was going to dismantle easily. I'm 6, Harry said. I'll get there. And then something extraordinary happened. Dumbledore smiled. It was not a manipulative smile, not the warm political smile Harry had half expected. It was a real one, and it was complicated, and it had grief in it and something that was genuinely close to pride, which was the most unsettling thing about it. The old man smiled at the child who had just helped dismantle him, and then he allowed himself to be walked up the aisle and out of the chamber, and the doors swung shut behind him. The chamber exhaled. Outside in the ministry corridor, Harry sat on a bench and drank a cup of water someone had handed him. The corridor was ministry marble and enchanted torches and the low murmur of people processing what had just occurred in the chamber behind the closed oak doors. Sirius sat beside him. Not talking. Just present. Harry had found, over the last week, that this was one of Sirius's qualities that he genuinely appreciated. He could be quiet when quiet was what was needed. It was the quality of someone who had spent 5 years with nothing but his own thoughts and had come out the other side understanding the value of silence. Pomfrey stood nearby, talking quietly with Amelia. Harry could hear fragments: press response, security, Hogwarts board, trial date, the next set of problems already being organized. He was tired. He hadn't expected to be, he'd expected the adrenaline to last longer, but the chamber and the testimony and Dumbledore's face and the smile, particularly the smile, had used more of him than he'd budgeted. The smile, he said. Sirius looked at him. At the end. He smiled. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Yeah. I saw. What do you think it meant? Sirius turned the question over. This was another thing Harry had found he appreciated. Sirius didn't give him quick answers to hard questions. He thought about them first. I think, Sirius said carefully, that Dumbledore has been the most important person in the room for a very long time. And today, in that chamber, the most important person in the room was a 6-year-old boy in Dudley Dursley's cast-offs. He paused. And I think on some level, some deeply annoying, deeply Dumbledore level, he thought that was the right outcome. Even though he lost. Even though he's the reason it was necessary in the first place. He shook his head. He's always been the most infuriating kind of person. The kind who's genuinely devoted to a good thing and genuinely monstrous in pursuing it. Harry nodded slowly. He's not finished, he said. No, Sirius agreed. He's not. Even from custody. Even from a trial. He still has people. He still has, the Order, whatever that is. He still has the argument about Voldemort. Yeah. And the thing is, Harry said, he's not wrong about Voldemort. That part, the coming back part, I believe that. Sirius was quiet. He just chose the wrong method, Harry said. That's all. He wasn't wrong about the problem. He was entirely wrong about the solution. He drank the last of his water. We're going to have to deal with Voldemort ourselves. Without his plan. Without his framework. On our own terms. Harry, Sirius said, you are 6. I keep hearing that, Harry said. It keeps being relevant. Noted. Harry stood up from the bench, straightened his slightly too large shirt, and looked down the ministry corridor toward the lift. Can we go get lunch? The adrenaline is wearing off and I'm very hungry. Sirius looked at him for a moment. Then he started to laugh, a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, the laugh of someone who had been holding themselves in careful check for days and found an unexpected release. It was a good laugh. Deep and warm and slightly unhinged with relief. Harry watched it happen with something that was warm in his chest and entirely, unambiguously, his own. Yeah, Sirius said, when he'd got himself back. Yeah, let's get lunch. They walked down the corridor together, the 6-year-old and his godfather, and behind them the Wizengamot chamber held the still settling weight of what had just occurred inside it, and ahead of them the lifts opened with a cheerful ding. Harry stepped in. The doors closed. The world on the other side of today was different from the world on the other side of yesterday. He could feel that, cleanly and entirely, with no chemical assistance whatsoever. He found he preferred it considerably. Chapter 4, The world. After 3 weeks out from the Wizengamot session, the wizarding world was doing what it always did when something fundamental shifted, it was arguing about it very loudly in print. The Daily Prophet had run 12 front-page stories. 6 of them were variations of Dumbledore betrayed our trust, 2 were variations of Dumbledore was right and here's why, and 4 were the journalistic equivalent of someone standing in a room that's on fire asking whether the fire was really as hot as people were saying. The letters column had tripled in length. Which Weekly had published a feature titled What the Loyalty Potion Scandal Means for Your Relationships that Harry had read with the specific fascination of someone watching a very large creature move in an entirely wrong direction. He'd read all of it, because he read everything. Not because he needed outside opinions to form his own, he'd been forming his own opinions in the absence of input since he was old enough to think, but because information was the only reliable currency and you had to know what was circulating. He was sitting at the kitchen table in Sirius's house, number 12, Grimmauld Place, which was large and dark and smelled of old wood and something faintly sulphurous that Sirius said was the doxy infestation in the drawing-room curtains and which Harry suspected was also just the house's fundamental personality, with 6 newspapers spread across the table in front of him and a mug of tea at his elbow. The house was in what Sirius called controlled chaos and what Harry thought of as accelerated transition. Sirius had been released from Azkaban into a house that had been sealed for 5 years, which meant it was simultaneously his home and a crime scene of his own past, photographs on the walls of people he'd loved, furniture covered in dust sheets, a kitchen that worked but only begrudgingly, and a portrait of his mother at the end of the entrance hall that shrieked abuse approximately every 30 minutes until someone drew the curtains across it. The portrait had tried that on Harry once. Harry had looked at it for a long moment, and then said, in a conversational tone, "You can stop now," and something in whatever magical intelligence animated it had clearly found that more disconcerting than the standard family screaming match it was designed for, because it had gone quiet and stayed quiet for the rest of the day. Sirius had stared at the curtained portrait with an expression of baffled reverence. "That's never worked for anyone," he said. "It's a portrait," Harry said. "It wants a reaction. If you don't give it one, it doesn't have a script. She'll be back tomorrow. Then I'll do it again tomorrow." She had been back. He had done it again. It was becoming a routine. The formal guardianship transfer had taken 11 days of paperwork, 3 ministry hearings, and 1 strongly worded letter from Amelia Bones to a Wizengamot subcommittee that had been dragging its feet. At the end of it, Sirius Black, cleared of all charges by a retroactive trial that lasted 4 hours and ended with a full acquittal and a formal ministry apology that Sirius had accepted with grace and then privately described to Harry as approximately a decade too late and about 100,000 galleons too short, was Harry Potter's legal magical guardian. Harry had attended the final guardianship hearing. He'd sat next to Sirius in the small formal chamber and watched the legal language be spoken over them like a ceremony, and when it was done Sirius had looked at him with the particular expression that Harry was beginning to understand was Sirius's specific frequency of overwhelming emotion, not crying, because Sirius was constitutionally resistant to crying in public, but the raw, unguarded face that occurred for approximately 3 seconds before he got it under control. Right then, Sirius had said. Right, Harry had agreed. They'd shaken hands, which was slightly absurd given everything, but Harry had offered it and Sirius had taken it and it had felt exactly correct. The tutor arrived on a Tuesday at 9 in the morning and Harry was in the front room when he knocked, so he opened the door himself. The man on the step was perhaps 35, compact and precise, with sharp eyes and a wand holster on his left forearm that was designed to be invisible under a jacket sleeve and wasn't quite. His name was Cassius Wren and Sirius had described him as the best private magical tutor in Britain and also the most expensive, but the Blacks have an absolutely obscene vault at Gringotts so that's fine. Wren looked at Harry in the doorway and didn't do the blinking thing. He did a quick assessment that was entirely professional, cataloging, not condescending, and said, "You're Harry." "Yes," Harry said. "Come in." They went to the study, which was the room Harry had spent 2 days making usable by the simple method of removing everything from the shelves, evaluating each item, and putting back only the things that served a purpose. The result was a room that was still clearly old but was now clear-headed about it. Wren looked around the study and sat in the chair Harry indicated, and Harry sat opposite him with a notebook and a quill because he'd found that writing things down during explanations helped him retain them faster. How much do you know? Ren asked. Theory. I've read Magical Theory by Adalbert Waffling, the first 3 books of Spellwork, its nature and application, and the first volume of Advanced Transfiguration. Practical, nothing formal, but controlled experiments. Harry paused. I've been practicing. Ren's eyes sharpened. Practicing what? Control. The accidental magic was reactive, emotional trigger, undirected output. I've been working on making it directed. Chosen. He glanced at the window, where a small stack of books sat on the sill. He looked at the stack. The books lifted slightly, then settled back. Ren was quiet for a moment. How long have you been doing that? Clean and consistent. 4 days. Inconsistent but present since day 8 of the cleansing protocol. Age 6, Ren said. Not with the blinking recalibration quality. With interest. Yes. What's your theory of why? Harry liked that question. He'd been thinking about it. The suppression, he said. The potions were dampening the output, but the core was still generating. Like pressure behind a door. When the door opened, the pressure was already there. I think I've just been directing what was already built up. He paused. I also think the core is large. Not normal large. Significantly large. I don't know what that means practically, whether it's just volume or whether there's something qualitatively different about it. That's one of the things I want to learn. Ren looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached into his case and pulled out a small crystal sphere, a magical output measurement tool, like a magical equivalent of a dynamometer, and set it on the desk between them. Give it something, he said. Whatever feels natural. Harry looked at the sphere. He thought about what Pomfrey had said, real emotions connect to something. Real magic felt similar to that, it connected, it reached, it wasn't performance. He let the feeling find the sphere the way a voice finds the correct note, not forced, not careful, just present. The sphere lit. Then it lit more. Then it cracked. Ren looked at the 2 halves of the sphere. He looked at Harry. He picked up both halves and examined the fracture point, which was clean and total, not a stress fracture, a capacity fracture. The sphere had hit its measurement ceiling and the ceiling had given way. Right, Ren said, putting the halves down. I'm going to need a different measurement tool. He pulled out his notebook. We're going to start with containment. Refinement. Precision. Because raw output at this level without precision is, a window blown out of a kitchen, Harry said. Considerably worse than that, eventually. Ren looked at him directly. What I'm about to teach you is going to feel slower than your instincts want. You're going to want to push and I'm going to ask you to refine. That tension is the work. Understood, Harry said. Good. Ren picked up his wand. We'll start with the technical foundation of intentional spellwork. Not the spells themselves, the mechanics underneath them. The architecture. Once you understand the architecture, the spells are just vocabulary. Harry opened his notebook. Go, he said. By the end of the first week of lessons, Ren had Harry executing basic directed spells, Lumos, Wingardium Leviosa, Reparo, with a consistency and precision that he told Sirius, privately, was approximately the level of a 3rd or 4th year Hogwarts student, which was simultaneously impressive and slightly alarming. The second week moved faster. Harry absorbed theory the way dry ground absorbed rain, and more importantly he didn't just absorb it, he questioned it, found the edges where theory didn't account for what he was actually experiencing, and pushed on those edges until either they gave way or Ren had to admit he didn't know and needed to find out. It was, Ren reported to Sirius, simultaneously the most rewarding and most exhausting tutoring engagement of his career. He's fine, Sirius said. He's extraordinary, Ren said. Which isn't the same thing. Harry, who was in the kitchen and could hear this conversation through the inadequate soundproofing of the study door, looked at his notebook and said nothing. He was aware of what he was. He'd been aware of it since the crystal sphere. Since the sparks from the lamp when he laughed. Since the lights in Lab 3 brightening to exactly the level he wanted without any conscious direction. He wasn't performing unawareness to seem modest, he just didn't find it particularly interesting as a topic. What he was interested in was what he could do with it, and how precisely he could do it, and whether precision was something that could be developed faster than the standard timeline suggested. It appeared that yes, it could. He was also aware, in the clearer, sharper way that characterized all of his thinking now, 3 weeks post-cleansing and with the last residue of the potion compounds nearly gone from his system, that the question of Voldemort was not going away. Dumbledore was in ministry custody awaiting trial. His immediate network was being dismantled by Amelia's investigation, Mundungus Fletcher had been arrested, Slughorn had given a full cooperating testimony in exchange for a reduced charge that Amelia had agreed to with the expression of someone swallowing something unpleasant but necessary. The laboratory in Edinburgh had been seized and its records were currently being analyzed by 7 ministry forensic specialists. None of that addressed Voldemort. Dumbledore had said he would return. Harry believed that. Not because Dumbledore had said so, he was done calibrating his beliefs by that particular compass, but because the evidence of the prophecy in the Department of Mysteries was real, and because the shape of what had happened on the night his parents died had the quality of something unfinished rather than something ended. A story interrupted rather than concluded. He'd asked Amelia about the prophecy. She'd arranged for him to hear it. The Department of Mysteries was the strangest place Harry had ever been, which was saying something given that he'd now been in the Wizengamot chamber, the St. Mungo's diagnostic lab, and the Gringotts vaults where Sirius had taken him to understand the scale of the Black family assets. It was underground and blue-lit and full of doors, and the Hall of Prophecy was a long, high-ceilinged room full of shelves stacked with small glass globes that glowed faintly, each one a recorded prophecy, each one a future someone had seen and been compelled to speak. His was on shelf 97. A small globe with a faded tag that read SPT to APWBD, the Dark Lord and HP. Amelia had accompanied him, it required authorization and she was authorization, and she stood slightly to the side while Harry looked at the globe without touching it. "You can take it," she said. "It's keyed to you." He lifted it. It was warm in his hand, which he hadn't expected. The glow increased slightly as he held it, and then a voice, a woman's voice, with the strange doubled quality of something speaking from somewhere outside ordinary time, began. "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other for neither can live while the other survives. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the 7th month dies." Silence. Harry turned the globe over in his hand. "Power the Dark Lord knows not," he said. "Yes. Any theories?" Amelia looked at him. "Several. Dumbledore's theory was love," Harry said. "It's in his letters, the ones to my aunt. He believed that the sacrifice of my mother created a blood protection that was the technical foundation for defeating Voldemort permanently. That the power was love. Yes. That was his working theory." Harry was quiet for a moment, looking at the globe. "It might be right," he said. "The part about the blood protection is probably real, that's documented magical mechanics. Sacrificial protection. My mother died for me voluntarily and that left something in my blood." He paused. "But I don't think that's the whole prophecy. I think he found the piece he needed and stopped looking. What do you think the rest of it means?" Harry put the globe carefully back on the shelf. He looked at the rows of other prophecies, all those futures, all those seen and spoken inevitabilities, all those people in little glowing spheres waiting to change the world. "I think," he said, "that I need to be much better than I am before I can be confident in any answer to that question." He turned from the shelf. "So let's go back and continue the lessons." The letter from Narcissa Malfoy came on a Thursday, 3 days after the Department of Mysteries visit. It was again addressed to Harry, again terse, again precise. This time it included an invitation, to Malfoy Manor, for what she described as an informal conversation between parties with aligned interests. Harry brought it to Sirius, who reacted with approximately the response Harry had expected. "Absolutely not," Sirius said. "She helped us," Harry said. "She helped herself. And she did it very skillfully. That's not the same as her being trustworthy." "I don't need her to be trustworthy," Harry said. "I need her to be useful and I need to understand what she wants." He set the letter on the table between them. She said aligned interests. She meant she wants her family positioned correctly in whatever the post-Dumbledore, post-Voldemort world looks like. She's an intelligent woman doing intelligent things to protect her son. I can work with that. She was a Death Eater supporter, her husband was a Death Eater, Harry said. The evidence from her folder was willingly given, which means she's already begun the process of stepping away from that alignment. She's not asking to be friends, Sirius. She's asking to negotiate. I want to know what she's negotiating with. Sirius stared at him. You're going to be the death of me, he said. I'll be very careful, Harry said. You're 6. You say that less convincingly every time. Sirius put his head in his hands for a long moment. Then he looked up. I come with you. Non-negotiable. I sit in the room. Agreed, Harry said. Malfoy Manor was enormous in the way that announced itself in advance. You saw it from the end of the drive and it was already clear that it was built to intimidate through sheer scale. The grounds were immaculate, the peacocks on the lawn were the most aggressively decorative thing Harry had ever seen, and the house itself was pale stone and large windows and entirely too many towers. Harry looked at it from the apparition point at the gate. Show off architecture, he said. Sirius made a sound that was almost a laugh. You have no idea. Narcissa met them at the door herself, which Harry noted, not a house elf, not a steward, the woman herself. She was in deep cream robes and her silver blonde hair was impeccable and she looked at Harry with the same composed, intelligent regard she directed at him across the cafe table. Mr. Potter, she said. Mr. Black. Mrs. Malfoy, Harry said. Sirius said nothing, which from the set of his jaw represented considerable restraint. She took them to a sitting room that was expensive but not aggressively so. She'd made a choice, Harry noted, about which room. Not the formal reception room, which would set a negotiating frame. Not the family rooms, which would be too familiar. This one, personal enough to suggest good faith, formal enough to maintain distance. It was a careful choice. He respected it. Tea appeared on the low table, a house elf stewing, unseen, and then another door opened and a small boy came in. He was perhaps 4, blonde, with his mother's eyes, and he was wearing the expression of a child who had been told to come and meet someone and was approaching it with the focused apprehension of that task. He stopped when he saw Harry. You're Harry Potter, the boy said. Yes, Harry said. Mummy said you were very brave in the big court thing. Draco, Narcissa said. She did, the boy said, to Harry, confidingly. That was kind of her, Harry said. Draco studied him with the frank, unmediated assessment that 4-year-olds had not yet learned to disguise. You're small, he said. You're also small, Harry said. Draco appeared to find this a satisfactory response. He came and sat in a chair beside Harry's end of the sofa with the air of someone who had decided to stay, and Narcissa looked at him with an expression that was briefly, completely unguarded, warm and slightly exhausted and entirely maternal, before reassembling itself. I'll have Bridget take him, she began. He can stay, Harry said. I don't mind. She looked at him for a moment. Nodded. Very well. She settled in the chair across from them. Sirius sat stiffly on Harry's other side. I asked you here because there are things I know that are not in the evidence Amelia Bones currently has, and that aren't the kind of things I can put in a ministry-routed letter. About Voldemort, Harry said. A very slight pause. She didn't flinch at the name. Harry noted that too. About certain members of his inner circle who are currently free, unmonitored, and under the assumption that the Dumbledore situation has created a useful vacuum. She looked at Harry steadily. Lucius, my husband, is compliant with the investigation. His cooperation is self-interested but real. Through him, I have names. Locations. Plans at an early stage. What do you want for this? Sirius asked. His voice was neutral now, the professional quality coming through the personal dislike. I want the Malfoy name removed from the Ministry watch list once Lucius's cooperation is formally recorded, she said. I want Draco's Hogwarts enrollment, whenever that time comes, to be unaffected by current events. And I want, she paused fractionally, an understanding. Not a formal agreement. An understanding. That Harry Potter knows who helped, and why, when the time comes. Harry looked at her. You're making an investment, he said. Yes. In me specifically. In the future specifically, she said. You happen to be the most significant variable in it. Draco, beside Harry, had located a small snitch on the side table and was turning it over in his small hands with the engrossed focus of a child who has decided he's not going to participate in the grown-up conversation and is sticking to that. The names and locations, Harry said. How current? As of 4 days ago. And your assessment of the timeline? When do they move? Narcissa's composure shifted fractionally, a very slight recalibration, a recognition that the question was more sophisticated than she'd expected. 2 months, perhaps 3. They're waiting to see how Dumbledore's trial resolves. If the sentence is significant, some of the fence-sitters will splinter and the core group will feel exposed and move faster. If he receives a light sentence, they may feel the Ministry lacks conviction and grow bold. Either way, 2 to 3 months, Harry said. Yes. Harry looked at his tea. He thought about the timeline. He thought about where he was with Ren's lessons, 3 weeks in, accelerating, but 3 weeks was 3 weeks. He thought about the prophecy's words. He thought about Dumbledore's face when he said you are not ready. He picked up his tea and drank some. It was very good tea. The Malfoys apparently did not compromise on tea. Tell me the names, he said. They left Malfoy Manor 2 hours later with a list of 6 names, 3 confirmed locations, and an outline of a plan that Narcissa had described, with some understatement, as ambitious in a way that suggests poor impulse control from the people involved. Sirius was quiet for the first minute of walking back down the drive. Then he said, that went differently than I expected. How did you expect it to go? I expected her to be more opaque. More performatively helpful and less actually helpful. She's made a calculation, Harry said. She's committed to it. There's no value in opacity once you've committed. He looked at the peacocks as they passed. One of them looked back with the magnificent indifference of the deeply decorative. She's genuinely frightened, he added. Of Voldemort? For Draco. Harry paused. There's a difference. Being frightened of Voldemort is political. Being frightened for your 4-year-old is something else. Sirius was quiet for a moment. You noticed all that. She chose the right room for the meeting. She brought Draco in, which she didn't have to do, and she let him stay when I said it was fine. She wanted me to see him. She wanted it to be a factor. Was it? Harry considered that honestly. Yes, he said. A bit. He looked at the end of the drive where the manor gates stood open. That's not the same as being manipulated by it. It was a genuine piece of information. She loves her son and she's afraid for him, and that makes her reliable in the way that self-interest alone doesn't, because self-interest shifts with circumstances but that kind of fear doesn't. They passed through the gates and Sirius turned to apparate them back to Grimmauld Place, and Harry stood at the apparition point for a moment and looked back at the manor. Draco had appeared in one of the upper windows. He raised his small hand in what was technically a wave, though he seemed uncertain whether it was appropriate and executed it with the caution of a child performing a social gesture for the first time. Harry raised his hand back. Then Sirius's hand was on his shoulder and the world compressed and expanded and they were standing in the hallway of Grimmauld Place, with the covered portrait of Walburga Black silent at the end of it and the familiar smell of old wood and doxy adjacent something in home, which it was becoming, in the way that places became home not through aesthetics but through the accumulation of ordinary moments. "Lesson tomorrow morning," Harry said. "Wren's coming at 9, Sirius confirmed." "Good." Harry went to hang his jacket on the hallway hook. Sirius had installed a second hook at his height, which was the kind of small domestic thing that hit Harry sometimes unexpectedly, the small practical acknowledgments of his presence. "I want to start on offensive spell work." Wren said he was planning. "I know what he was planning." Harry turned around. "I want to move it forward. I have a timeline now. 2 to 3 months. He met Sirius's eyes. "I'd like to be ready before that, please." Sirius looked at him for a long time. "Right," he said. "Right," Harry said. He went to the kitchen to make dinner, because it was his turn and he'd found he liked cooking, found it satisfying in the focused, outcome-oriented way he liked most things, and behind him Sirius stood in the hallway for a moment with his face doing everything it usually did when he thought Harry wasn't watching. Then the portrait woke up and screamed, and Sirius swore, and Harry heard it from the kitchen and called, "Front edge of the curtain, pull left," and heard Sirius do it, and the portrait went quiet, and then they were both in the silence and the house was warm around them, and outside London moved through its evening, and the 2 months were ticking. Chapter 5, The Ones Who Stayed Loyal. The first time Harry cast a proper shield charm, every window in the Grimmauld Place study blew open simultaneously. Not out. Open. Like something had taken an enormous breath. The curtains flew horizontal, papers scattered from the desk, and a stack of books Wren had placed on the shelf rattled violently before settling. Outside, a pigeon that had been sitting on the windowsill departed with the urgent energy of something reconsidering all its life choices. The shield itself had been flawless. Wren stood in the middle of the room looking at the open windows and then at Harry, who was standing with his wand, a temporary one, 11 inches, reasonably flexible, nothing like what he'd eventually be matched to properly, but functional, extended and his expression thoughtful. "The excess displacement," Harry said. "It's a pressure equalization problem. The shield forms a contained field and the energy that doesn't go into the field has to go somewhere." "Yes," Wren said. "So the solution is either tighter formation, pulling the field boundary closer to minimize the volume, or a deliberate bleed channel, a specific directional output for the excess." "Also yes. Which do you recommend?" Wren picked up the nearest book from the floor, replaced it on the shelf, and said, "For most witches and wizards, tighter formation. For you, the bleed channel, because your output volume makes tight formation geometrically complex at speed, and you're going to need speed." He looked at Harry with the expression he developed over the past 5 weeks, part satisfaction, part the specific exhaustion of someone running to keep up with their own student. "You're going to be executing these under pressure. In real circumstances. Tight formation under pressure is a precision instrument. A bleed channel under pressure is robust." "Show me the bleed channel mechanics," Harry said. They spent the next 2 hours on it. By the end Harry had it consistent enough that the windows only opened on 2 out of every 5 attempts, which Wren noted in his log as significant rapid progression and which Harry noted internally as not good enough yet. The standard was not good enough yet. That was his standard. Not what was impressive for his age, or impressive for his level of training, or impressive relative to anything external. Good enough to do what needed doing. That was the standard, and anything short of it was just the current position on the road, not the destination. He'd told Wren this on the 3rd day of lessons and Wren had looked at him the way people sometimes looked at Harry, the recalibrating look, and said, "That's a healthy way to think about it as long as you're not using the gap between current and necessary as a reason to be unkind to yourself." Harry had thought about that. "I don't think I do," he said. "I think I just find the gap interesting. It's where the work is. Ren had written something in his notebook. "What are you writing?" Harry asked. "Things I'm going to tell other tutors," Ren said. 6 weeks after the Wizengamot session, Amelia Bones called a meeting. It was held at Grimmauld Place rather than the Ministry, which was deliberate. The Ministry had ears in ways that Amelia had grown increasingly cautious about, particularly after a memo had been intercepted 3 weeks earlier that suggested someone in the Department of International Magical Cooperation was passing information to parties with Voldemort-adjacent interests. She described this to Harry with the flat precision of someone reading a structural engineering report about a crack in a foundation. "How wide is the breach?" Harry had asked. "Unknown. That's the problem. So we operate as if everything through Ministry channels is potentially compromised. Until I can audit the department thoroughly, yes." "How long for the audit?" 4 weeks, ideally. "We have 6 at most," Harry said, thinking of Narcissa's timeline. "Move faster." Amelia had looked at him the way she sometimes looked at him, the look of someone who was both the senior person in the room and not quite the dominant intelligence in the conversation, navigating that dynamic with the professional grace it required. "I'll see what I can do," she said, which in Amelia's language meant she was already doing it. The meeting at Grimmauld Place was 8 people. Amelia. Frank. Dora, who arrived with her hair cycling through colors at a rate that suggested she was thinking hard. Sirius. Ren, who was there because he'd become functionally part of the household. Pomfrey, who came for medical and moral authority and because nobody called a meeting without Pomfrey if Pomfrey was available. Narcissa, who Sirius had admitted through the front door with the specific expression of someone allowing a thing they don't like because they've accepted its necessity. And Harry. The 8th person was Remus Lupin, who Sirius had contacted through 3 layers of intermediaries and who had arrived on Sirius's doorstep the previous night looking like a man who had walked a long distance and expected to be turned away and wasn't sure what to do with not being turned away. Harry had opened the door because he was nearest to it. They'd looked at each other. Remus looked like he'd been weathered, not old, not quite, but worn in the way of someone for whom life had been consistently difficult and who had kept going anyway. He had kind eyes and careful posture and a patch on the elbow of his jacket that had been there long enough to be part of the jacket's identity. "You must be Harry," Remus said, with the voice of someone who had rehearsed this and found no version adequate. "Yes," Harry said. "Sirius said you were his best friend." Something moved across Remus's face. "He was mine as well." "Come in," Harry said. "He's in the kitchen. He's been pretending not to watch the front door for an hour." Remus's expression did something complicated and warm. "That sounds right," he said, and came in. The reunion between Sirius and Remus had occurred in the kitchen and Harry had quietly removed himself to the study, because some things required privacy, and he was learning, in the accumulation of these weeks, the difference between information he needed and information that belonged to someone else. The sounds from the kitchen had been low and occasionally broken and entirely private and he'd worked through 2 chapters of advanced defensive casting and been very focused on them. Remus had found him in the study after an hour and sat in the spare chair and said, without preamble, "He told me everything. About the investigation. About you. All of it." He looked at Harry steadily. "I should have found you years ago. I want you to know that I know that, and I have no excuse for it that rises above inadequate." "Were you part of Dumbledore's network?" "Peripherally. Not in a way that makes me responsible for the potions, I didn't know about those. But in a way that made me defer to him, trust his judgment. Accept that you were safe because he said so." He held Harry's gaze. "I should have checked. I didn't. I chose the easier thing." Harry looked at him. "Can you do defensive and offensive magical theory?" A pause. "Yes. Ren's good on practical mechanics. He's less strong on battle application theory. The tactics of magical combat, engagement distance, terrain use, simultaneous spell management." He tilted his head slightly. "Were you an Order? Order of the Phoenix? First War?" That's what I need. The theory of it. How it actually works when it's real, not controlled practice. Remus looked at him for a long moment. You're going to fight, he said. Yes. You're 6, Harry said. I know. Remus closed his eyes briefly. Then he said, all right. Yes. I can do that. He paused. Your father would have been, he stopped. Started again differently. Your mother would have had very specific feelings about this. Good specific or bad specific? Complicated specific, Remus said, which was honest, and Harry respected it. Tuesday afternoons, Harry said. Ren has me in the mornings. You can have the afternoons. Agreed, Remus said. The meeting started with Amelia laying out what she had. The 6 names Narcissa had provided matched 3 names already on the Ministry's Person of Interest list and produced 3 new ones. The locations had been confirmed by Frank's surveillance over the past 2 weeks, a property in Wiltshire, a warehouse facility outside Edinburgh that was different from the potions laboratory, and a townhouse in Edinburgh's new town that was registered under 3 different corporate identities. They're consolidating, Amelia said. The Wiltshire property is residential, we believe it's where they're holding meetings. The Edinburgh locations are logistical. Supply, communication, possibly a staging point. Timeline? Harry asked. Based on the communication intercepts we've managed, and this is partial, the Ministry breach complicates our picture, we think the initiating event is going to be Dumbledore's trial. Whatever sentence comes down will be a signal, in one direction or the other. When is the trial? The first formal session is in 3 weeks. So we have 3 weeks at the outside, Harry said. He looked at the map Amelia had spread across the table, the 3 locations marked in red. The Wiltshire property is where they'll be when they move. It's the meeting point. The Edinburgh locations are infrastructure. Our assessment as well, Frank said. Then Edinburgh first, Harry said. Take the infrastructure before they know we're moving. Then Wiltshire, but only if we've cleared Edinburgh cleanly enough that they don't have warning. He looked at Amelia. Does the Ministry have the operational capacity for simultaneous? Yes, Amelia said. Frank's team is ready. The question is the leadership at Wiltshire. She paused. The individuals named in that location include Bellatrix Lestrange, who escaped Azkaban custody during the administrative chaos following the Dumbledore arrest, Antonin Dolohov, and Evan Rosier. These are not ordinary, I know who they are, Harry said. Harry. That was Pomfrey. Her voice was even and had the quality it got when she was about to say something she considered medically necessary regardless of the reception. I want to address something directly. You are 6 weeks into formal training. Your magical core is extraordinary and your development is extraordinary. But Bellatrix Lestrange is one of the most dangerous combat witches of the last century. She survived 2 Azkaban terms and multiple Ministry engagements, she's also unstable, Harry said. Instability is a tactical liability. It means she escalates past the point of strategic thinking when pressured. You push her hard enough, fast enough, and she becomes predictable. He paused. I'm not planning to duel Bellatrix Lestrange in a straight line. The room was quiet. What are you planning? Sirius asked. His voice was carefully neutral, which meant he had thoughts he was reserving. Let me show you something, Harry said. He stood up and went to the study, where he'd left something he'd been working on for the past week, and came back with a piece of parchment covered in diagrams. He spread it on the table beside the map. It wasn't a battle plan in the traditional sense. It was more architectural, angles, positions, sequences, like a choreography with contingencies at each beat. He'd been working on it with Remus, who had the specific knowledge of how magical combat actually moved and how the theory of it mapped onto real chaos, and with Ren, who understood the mechanics of what was physically possible at Harry's current level and where the ceilings were. The Wiltshire engagement was broken into phases: environmental assessment, positioning, the specific sequence for handling Dolohov first because Dolohov was the most technically precise of the three and therefore the most dangerous if he had time and space to work, and then Rosier, and then, separately, differently, Bellatrix. He walked them through it. He spoke clearly and specifically and answered the questions that came, Frank's logistical ones, Amelia's legal authorization questions, Remus's tactical what-ifs, Sirius's increasingly strained attempts to find the objection that would hold. When he finished, the room was quiet. Narcissa was looking at the diagram with an expression that was, in its precise way, impressed. "The Dolohov sequence," she said. "You've identified his dominant eye. His wand-hand coordination is right-side dominant and his visual tracking follows it. He leads with his right eye when he targets. Force him left and he'll reposition before engaging, which costs him the half-second that matters." Narcissa nodded once. "Accurate." Sirius stood up and walked to the window. He stood there for a moment with his back to the room. "Sirius," Harry said. "Give me a second." Harry gave him a second. Sirius turned around. His face was the face of a man who had argued with himself and arrived somewhere he didn't entirely like but recognized as true. "You're going," he said. "You're going and there's no version of this where you're not going." "Yes." "Then I'm going with you. Non-negotiable, don't argue, I know I sound like a broken record, I'm going." "I know," Harry said. "You're in the plan. Look at position 2. Sirius looked at the diagram. He found position 2. He looked at where Harry had placed himself relative to it. "You put yourself in front," he said. "I put myself where I need to be," Harry said. "You're covering the angle I can't watch. It's not a heroics decision. It's a geometry one." Remus was looking at the diagram with the expression of someone who had spent 20 years thinking about how the people he loved went into danger and had not found the peace of it but had found the accommodation of it. "The environmental prep," he said. "You need 2 days minimum on the Wiltshire property before engagement. Reconnaissance. Terrain familiarization." "Agreed," Harry said. "That's Frank's team for the first day, then me the second." "Sirius with me." "Me too," Dora said. Her hair had gone a decided, resolute brown. "I have skills that are specifically useful for reconnaissance and I'm not sitting the prep out." "Dora," Frank said. "I'm not, Frank." Frank looked at her. Then at Harry. Then he made the specific expression of a man who has decided which battles are worth fighting. "Fine," he said. "Dora on reconnaissance day 2. Ren had been quiet through most of this. He'd been looking at the combat diagram with the focused, technical attention of someone checking it against his understanding of Harry's current capabilities. Now he said, "The shielding in Phase 2, you need the bleed channel consistent before this happens. You're not there yet." "I have 3 weeks," Harry said. "You'll need every day of them. Then we start tomorrow at 7 instead of 9. Ren looked at him. 7, he agreed. The 3 weeks were the most concentrated work Harry had ever done, and he had spent his entire 6 years doing work that most people would have found concentrated. He and Ren were in the study by 7 each morning. The bleed channel issue resolved on day 4, the pressure equalization clicked into place in a way that felt, as breakthroughs tended to feel, both sudden and inevitable, like something he'd been walking toward and arrived at rather than something that had happened to him. The windows stopped opening entirely. The shield formed clean and total and the excess energy bled in a controlled horizontal direction like a steady exhale. Ren watched it happen on day 4 and put down his notebook and just looked at Harry for a moment. "What?" Harry said. "Nothing," Ren said. "Again." He did it again. "Perfect." Again. "Perfect." Again, under duress, Ren throwing simultaneous mock curses, the room noisy and disrupted, Harry's attention pulled in 3 directions, and still perfect. "Good," Ren said, with the economy of someone for whom good meant something significant. The afternoons with Remus were different. Ren's lessons were precise and mechanical, the architecture of magic. Remus's were contextual and human, the reality of magic in use. He talked through engagements he'd been in during the First War, not reminiscing but analyzing, pulling the tactical substance out of them like specimens. Here is what Dolohov does when cornered. Here is how Bellatrix reads a room when she enters it, what she looks for first, where her attention goes. Here is the difference between a duel and a fight, and why most people who trained for duels lost fights. Harry listened and asked and listened more, and the information layered with Ren's mechanics to produce something that wasn't quite either thing separately but was the combination of both, a way of thinking about magical combat that was strategic and technical simultaneously, that had room for the reality of fear and adrenaline and chaos without being defined by them. On the evenings when lessons were done and dinner was finished and the house had settled into its nighttime quality, Sirius would sometimes come to the study where Harry was reading, and they'd sit together, Sirius with a butterbeer he'd stopped pretending was something he could drink slowly, Harry with tea, and talk about things that were not the investigation or the plan or the training. James Potter. Lily Potter. The specific texture of their lives as people rather than as Harry's dead parents, who were a concept, a grief, a gap. Sirius told the stories badly, jumping between timelines, correcting himself, getting distracted by the detail he most wanted to include, and Harry listened and filed them and sometimes asked questions that made Sirius stop in the middle of a sentence and look at him with that expression. "What?" Harry would say. "You asked the same thing your dad would have asked," Sirius said, once. Same exact phrasing. Harry turned that over. He'd said, but why did he think that would work? About a Quidditch strategy James had apparently deployed with more confidence than success. It was a genuine question. He didn't know what to do with the answer that it was also his father's question, except to feel something that was warm and complicated and entirely his own. "Tell me if it happens again," he said. Every time, Sirius promised. On the 12th day of training, something happened that nobody had planned for. Harry was in the back garden of Grimmauld Place. They'd been using it for the more physically demanding drills, the movement work, the engagement distance practice that required room, running through the Dolohov sequence for the 4th time that morning. Remus was playing Dolohov, directing controlled jinxes from the far end of the garden. Harry was moving, not standing still and casting, but moving, the way Remus had emphasized, because standing still in a real fight was a choice to be a target. The sequence went cleanly. Harry redirected Remus's jinxes rather than shielding against them. Deflection was faster than absorption, Remus had taught him, in a protracted engagement, moved left on the 4th beat, dropped low under the 5th, and came up with a binding hex angled for the wrist of the dominant hand. The binding hex landed. The problem was, it landed considerably harder than intended. Remus was lifted 6 inches off the ground and pinned against the garden wall with an impact that knocked the breath out of him, held there by the binding with a grip that absolutely would not release until Harry noticed what had happened and deliberately unwound it. When Remus came down from the wall and caught his breath, there was a brief silence. "I adjusted for your weight differential," Harry said immediately. "The calculation was wrong. The output was 3 times what I intended." "I noticed," Remus said, mildly, straightening his jacket. "Are you hurt? Winded?" "Nothing worse." He looked at Harry. Not with recrimination. With assessment. "What happened?" Harry thought through it. "Emotional state," he said. "I was fully in the sequence, running hot. The concentration I was using was focused on positioning, not on output calibration. The calibration was in the background process, and under that level of focus the background process, amplified," Remus said. "Yes. That's going to happen in a real engagement. More. Not less." He looked at Harry steadily. "This is the thing I've been circling around and I'll say it directly now. Your power level is not the problem. Your power level is considerable and it's an asset. The problem is that under high-intensity engagement, your calibration will drift upward. Things will hit harder than you mean them to. That has consequences, for enemies and potentially for allies nearby. Harry sat on the low garden wall. He thought about it. The solution isn't to reduce output, he said. The solution is to move the calibration out of the background process and into the foreground. Explicit rather than implicit control. Yes. But explicit control takes conscious bandwidth that you need for tactics. So I have to make it automatic at the level it currently is at the background, but accurate. Calibrated by default, not by conscious effort. That's right. That takes repetition. Thousands of repetitions until the calibration is instinct. Yes. Harry looked at his hands. He looked at the mark on the garden wall where Remus had hit it. How long did it take you? He asked. Remus considered. 3 years, give or take. Of regular practice. Harry was quiet. We have 16 days, he said. Yes. Then we do thousands of repetitions in 16 days. Remus looked at him for a long moment. The kind of moment where something is being decided, not the practical decision, which was already made, but the underlying thing, the real thing. You're not afraid, he said. Of what you could do if it goes wrong. I'm concerned, Harry said. There's a difference. He looked at Remus directly. If I let concern become fear, I'll clamp down on the output and lose the asset. I need to stay with the concern, keep it present, use it for calibration, without letting it become a reason to hold back. Remus exhaled. James would have been terrified and gone in anyway, he said. Lily would have had the plan you have. You're both of them. You say that like it's complicated. It's the most wonderful complicated thing I've ever seen, Remus said. They looked at each other in the pale garden, morning moving around them. Again, Harry said, standing up. And this time tell me when my calibration drifts. In real time. Every time. Every time, Remus agreed, and raised his wand. The Edinburgh operations went on a Thursday, executed by Frank's team in the grey morning hours between 4 and 6. The warehouse was cleared in 11 minutes. The townhouse in the new town took 22, because there were 3 occupants who were awake and armed, and the engagement got loud in a way that brought 2 Muggle police vehicles to the street outside, which Dora handled with an obliviate and an extremely convincing story about a gas leak while Frank's team finished inside. Harry was not at Edinburgh. That had been the plan and he'd accepted it. The Edinburgh operations were about infrastructure, and Frank's team was the right tool for that. He was at Grimmauld Place, in the kitchen, drinking tea, following the communication mirror updates with Sirius at the table beside him. When the confirmation came through that both Edinburgh locations were cleared and secured, Harry set down his tea and said, "Right. Tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Sirius confirmed. He looked at Sirius. Sirius looked at him. "Are you frightened?" Sirius asked. Harry considered the honest answer. "I feel the concern," he said. "The appropriate amount of it. It's there." He paused. "Are you?" "Completely terrified," Sirius said. "I am fully, completely terrified. I've been terrified since you showed me the plan and I saw where you put yourself in it. I've been terrified in a continuous unbroken line since then. But you're going." "Of course I'm going," Sirius said. "Terror doesn't get a vote. It just comes along for the ride." Harry looked at him. Something warm in his chest that he recognized now, clearly and completely, as genuinely his. Earned. Real. "Get some sleep," he said. "We leave at 6. Wiltshire in November was cold and grey and the fields around the property were misted over, and they operated into the tree line at the property's eastern edge as the light was just beginning to come up. Harry, Sirius, Dora. Remus at the northern position as backup. Frank's secondary team holding the road 200 meters out. The property was an old manor, not Malfoy scale, but substantial, with a walled garden and outbuildings and the specific quality of a place that had been made deliberately hard to see. The anti-Muggle wards were visible to Harry's magical sense the way heat was visible on a hot road, a shimmer, a distortion. The other wards, the alarms, the defensive perimeter, he'd mapped them on the reconnaissance day, committed them to memory. He knew exactly where the gaps were. 3 inside, he said quietly. His voice was calm. Bellatrix in the east room, that's the one with the lights still on. Dolohov and Rosier are likely together, the main hall, because Narcissa said Dolohov doesn't sleep before an operation and Rosier doesn't sleep without company. How do you want to do the entry? Dora murmured. East wall, the gap between the second and third alarm wards. Sirius, you're through first and take the interior left, the corridor to the main hall. I'll take the east room. Dora, you hold the exit and prevent apparition, you know the counter ward. Done this before, Dora said. Good. Harry looked at the manor. The lights in the east room. He thought about Bellatrix Lestrange, and what Narcissa had told him. She's not fighting for Voldemort, she's fighting for the experience of fighting, she's addicted to it, the magic itself, the destruction, she's the most dangerous person in that house and also the simplest, and he thought about Remus's voice saying you push her hard enough, fast enough, and she becomes predictable. Go, he said. They moved through the gap in the wards in a clean line, and then Sirius was left and Dora was at the exit point and Harry was moving toward the east room door and the light under it was warm and still and no alarm had been triggered. He opened the door. Bellatrix Lestrange was standing in the middle of the room with her wand already raised. She'd felt it. Not the approach, they'd been clean, but something. The particular sensitivity of someone who had spent decades with their magic in a state of constant readiness and could feel a shift in a room's magical atmosphere the way a sailor felt a change in wind direction. She looked at him. At the small boy in the doorway. Her face did something, disbelief, then calculation, then something that was close to delight in a way that confirmed exactly what Narcissa had said about her and what she fought for. Harry Potter, she said. Her voice was its own kind of weapon, warm and musical and completely unhinged in a way that the warmth made worse rather than better. Oh, you brave little thing. Bellatrix, Harry said. His voice was even. His wand was up. You can surrender now or we can do this the other way. I genuinely don't have a preference. She laughed. It was a real laugh, delighted, uncontrolled. The other way, she said. Absolutely the other way. Avada, he moved before the curse was complete. Not sideways. Forward and left, dropping below the angle of her wand, coming up inside the distance where the killing curse's geometry became awkward. Remus had explained it, the curse required a clean line, a maintained angle, it was not a flexible weapon at close quarters, and as he came up he was already casting. Not the killing curse. Not anything that required her still. Locomotor mortis, a body binding that hit her legs and locked them mid-stride. She went down hard, wand arm still trying to track him, and he was already redirecting because she was still dangerous on the floor, maybe more, the wand in her hand swinging wildly. Expelliarmus, on her wand hand, at close enough range that the force of it drove her arm back against the floor. The wand skittered across the floorboards. She was lying on the floor of the east room, legs bound, wandless, and she was looking up at him with an expression that had cycled through fury and disbelief and arrived, disconcertingly, back at delight. Clever boy, she said. From the main hall there was the sound of spell work. Sirius and Dora, he tracked it automatically, the signatures of their specific casting, the response signatures that were Dolohov and Rosier, and it was going the way it was supposed to go. The sounds had the quality of controlled engagement rather than emergency. Harry looked down at Bellatrix. Don't try to apparate, he said. Dora's holding the exit ward. Don't try to summon the wand, I'll intercept it. And please don't try to tell me this isn't over, because I know it isn't, and I'll deal with the rest when the rest arrives. She stared at him from the floor with those wild, black eyes. You're 6 years old, she said. Yes, he said. Funny how that keeps coming up. He summoned her wand without looking at it, caught it with his other hand, and tucked it into his belt. Then he looked toward the door to the main hall because the sound of spellwork had stopped. Sirius appeared in the doorway. His robe was scorched at the shoulder and there was a cut across his cheekbone that Pomfrey was going to have opinions about, but he was standing under his own power and his eyes were clear. He looked at Bellatrix on the floor. He looked at Harry. Dolohov and Rosier are down, he said. Dora's fine. Remus didn't need to move from his position. Harry nodded. You went in alone, Sirius said. It was my position in the plan. I know it was your position in the plan. I was there when you made the plan. Sirius ran a hand through his hair, which was already chaotic, and became more so. I'm fine. You're fine. She's on the floor. We're fine. He said it like he was reminding himself of the sequence. We're fine. We're fine, Harry confirmed. From the floor, Bellatrix said, in the voice of someone who had not yet revised her emotional position on any of this, he's magnificent, actually. You should be proud. Sirius looked at her with an expression that was simultaneously the deep loathing of someone who had lost people to this woman and, barely visible underneath it, the helpless agreement of someone who found the statement difficult to entirely reject. Shut up, Bellatrix, he said. She smiled at the ceiling. Frank's team came through the door 30 seconds later, and the formal arrests were made, and the morning moved on around them, the mist burning off the Wiltshire fields outside, the manor standing in the thin winter sunlight, Dora sending a green signal flare up into the sky that meant all clear, all secured, and Harry standing in the east room listening to the flare crack open overhead and feeling the concern settling, doing what concern that had been properly used always did, transforming. In the aftermath, into something clean. Not pride. Not quite. Just the specific clarity of a thing done that needed doing. Done right. Done clean. Done, for the first time in his life, entirely on his own terms. They were back at Grimmauld Place by noon. Pomfrey arrived 8 minutes after they did, summoned by what Harry suspected was Sirius's communication mirror message, and she assessed the scorched shoulder and the cut cheekbone and the small graze on Dora's forearm with the focused efficiency of someone who was extremely good at her job and had been very worried for 3 hours and was expressing that worry through impeccable medical practice. Harry sat at the kitchen table and drank tea and ate a biscuit and let the morning settle. Remus sat down across from him. He looked at Harry for a moment. How do you feel? He asked. Harry considered it honestly. Tired, he said. Calibration held throughout, which I'm pleased about. The entry timing was correct. The Bellatrix approach, the close quarters choice, was right. That's the tactical assessment, Remus said. How do you feel? Harry looked at him. Then he looked at the window, at the narrow London sky above the terrace houses. Okay, he said. It was a simple word and an accurate one. I feel okay. He paused. She said I was magnificent. She has atrocious judgment in most things, Remus said. That one she got right. Harry almost smiled. Not quite. Voldemort, he said. Not today, Remus said firmly. No. Not today. Harry picked up his biscuit. But we've taken the infrastructure. The Edinburgh operations, the Wiltshire arrests, he's lost his network's forward capacity. The people who were building his return platform, gone. He's alive somewhere, and he'll rebuild eventually. He looked at Remus. But he's slower now. We've bought time. How much time do you want? Harry thought about it. About the prophecy in its glass sphere. About the bleed channel now clean and certain. About Remus on the garden wall and the calibration problem solved across 16 days of thousands of repetitions. About Sirius's face in the East Room doorway, scorched and cut and relieved. About the Department of Mystery's visit and the question he'd been sitting with since, power the Dark Lord knows not. Enough, he said. Enough to be ready. He finished his biscuit. Outside, London carried on. Chapter 6, a new alignment. Dumbledore's trial lasted 9 days. Harry attended every session. Not because Amelia required it, she didn't, she had the evidence, she had Slughorn's cooperating testimony and Petunia Dursley's written statement and the forensic chain from the Edinburgh laboratory all the way to the Hogwarts board slush fund. She had more than enough. Harry attended because he'd said from the beginning that he was going to be in the room for the decisions that concerned him, and Dumbledore's trial concerned him in the most fundamental way anything could concern a person. It was the formal accounting for what had been done to his life before he'd been old enough to understand that his life was being managed. The trial chamber was different from the Wizengamot session, smaller, more formal, with a ministry-appointed judicial panel of 7 rather than 50 members, and the weight of it was different too. The Wizengamot session had been political, dramatic, a public reckoning in a room full of people recalibrating their world. The trial had the specific, grinding quality of thorough justice, each charge addressed individually, each piece of evidence presented and challenged and responded to, each witness examined and cross-examined with methodical care. Dumbledore had retained counsel, a woman named Kasia Albright who was, by general consensus, the finest defense advocate in Wizarding Britain, and who performed exactly as advertised. She challenged the evidentiary chain at every point where it could be challenged. She presented context arguments, Voldemort's threat, the prophecy, the genuine stakes of an inadequately prepared Harry Potter facing a returned Dark Lord, with intelligence and discipline. She found the places where Amelia's case had seams and worked them with professional persistence. She was very good. The case was better. Harry sat in the witness section each day and watched the judicial panel, watched Dumbledore, watched Albright, and on the afternoon of the 3rd day he passed a note to Amelia that read, "Albright is going to challenge the dating methodology on the potion administrations. She's been reading the forensic report with a specific focus, she's found something she thinks is a vulnerability in the degradation timeline analysis. Talk to your forensic specialist tonight." Amelia had read the note without expression and passed it to Frank, and that evening they'd spent 2 hours with the forensic specialist reinforcing the evidentiary foundation for the degradation dating, and on the 4th morning when Albright raised exactly the challenge Harry had predicted, the response was airtight. Amelia had looked at Harry afterward with the expression she sometimes got, the one that was pure assessment, all the social layers stripped off, and said quietly, "How did you know?" She kept returning to page 14 of the forensic report, Harry said. Specifically the section on Type 7 degradation curves. The 3rd time she turned to it she had a quill out and wasn't writing anything. She was thinking, not noting. When someone reads the same page 3 times and only takes out a quill on the 3rd pass and doesn't write anything, they've found a question they think they can use. Amelia looked at him. "You were watching her read." "I was watching everything," Harry said. On the 6th day, Dumbledore took the stand himself. Albright had been building toward it, the defense needed his direct testimony, needed his voice, needed the particular quality of his presence which no amount of documentation could replicate. Harry had been waiting for it. He sat in the witness section and watched Albus Dumbledore stand in the center of the trial chamber and address the panel with the same composed, absolute conviction he'd demonstrated in the Wizengamot session 7 weeks earlier. The testimony was what Harry had expected, honest, unapologetic, and built on the architecture of genuine belief. Dumbledore didn't recant. He didn't minimize. He laid out his reasoning in full, the prophecy, the return of Voldemort, the necessity of a prepared Harry Potter, the calculation that certain costs were acceptable in service of the greater survival of the wizarding world, and he did it with the clarity of a man who had made peace with every choice he'd ever made. It was compelling. Harry watched the panel as Dumbledore spoke and saw 2 of the 7 visibly affected, their expressions moving through something that was close to understanding, close to the forgiveness that came from believing a person had genuinely intended the right thing even if they'd done the wrong one. On the afternoon of the 6th day, during a recess, Harry asked Amelia if he could take the stand again. She looked at him. "You already testified." "I know. I have something specific I need to say and it needs to be said in response to his testimony. Not in a written statement. In the room." Amelia considered it. "Albright will cross-examine." "That's fine. She's very good. So am I, Harry said, without particular emphasis. Just accuracy. Amelia pressed her lips together, thought about it, and said, I'll make the application. The panel approved it. On the morning of the 7th day Harry took the stand a second time. He looked at the panel. He looked at Dumbledore. Then he looked at the panel again, because they were the ones who mattered. Professor Dumbledore said his calculations were about preparation, Harry said. He said the measures he took were to ensure I would be ready to face Voldemort. I want to address that specifically. He paused. 3 weeks ago, I was part of an operation that dismantled a network of Voldemort's supporters. We secured 2 logistic sites in Edinburgh and neutralized 3 of Voldemort's most dangerous active operatives in Wiltshire. Bellatrix Lestrange, Antonin Dolohov, and Evan Rosier are in ministry custody. He let that sit for exactly 1 second. I was 6 weeks into formal magical training. I will be 7 years old in July. The chamber was very quiet. Professor Dumbledore's preparation, Harry said, consisted of 67 potions that manufactured loyalty to himself, isolation in a house where I was malnourished and kept in a cupboard, and 0 formal education, 0 magical instruction, 0 contact with the wizarding world that was my birthright. His calculation was that a sufficiently loyal, sufficiently suppressed Harry Potter could be deployed as a weapon at the right moment. My actual preparation, 6 weeks of honest teaching from people who told me the truth, produced someone who went into Wiltshire and didn't need to be deployed by anyone. He looked at Dumbledore directly. The difference between his version of preparation and the real version isn't tactical. It's philosophical. He wanted a weapon he controlled. What happens when you just tell someone the truth and teach them properly is that you get a person. A person is considerably more effective than a weapon, because a person can think. He looked back at the panel. He said I wouldn't be ready without his plan. I want the panel to consider whether the 67 potions and the cupboard were actually preparation, or whether they were control mechanisms dressed in the language of preparation. Whether the real purpose of what was done to me was ever about Voldemort at all, or whether it was about making sure that whatever I became it in the direction of Albus Dumbledore. He stepped down. Albright cross-examined him for 40 minutes. She was precise and relentless and tried 4 different angles, and Harry answered every question with the same steady directness he'd used in the Wizengamot session, not defensively, not combatively, just accurately. At the end of the 40 minutes Albright sat down with the expression of someone who has done everything correctly and achieved a result that is nonetheless not what she'd hoped for. The panel took 2 days to deliberate. On the 9th day, they delivered the verdict. Guilty on all primary charges. The sentence, 5 years in a low-security ministry facility, not Azkaban, the panel specified, because the panel was composed of people who had seen what Azkaban did to a person and had decided that its application required careful justification, with full stripping of all titles and positions, permanent revocation of chief warlock authority, and a supervised period following release. It was not the maximum possible sentence. Harry had known it wouldn't be. The panel had believed, at some level, in Dumbledore's genuine conviction, in the man's real devotion to a real cause, however catastrophically wrong his methods. The 5 years was the panel arriving at the sentence that accounted for both the crime and the man. Harry sat in the witness section as the verdict was read and watched Dumbledore receive it. The old man stood very straight. He looked at the panel. He looked, briefly, at Harry. And then he nodded, once, with the specific gravity of someone acknowledging a formal outcome, and he allowed himself to be escorted from the chamber. He did not look defeated. He looked like a man who had played a very long game, arrived at an unexpected terminus, and was already thinking about the next move. Harry watched him go and thought, he's going to be in that facility thinking about Voldemort every single day. He's going to be running his calculations, revising his models, building new contingencies. He's not gone. He's just removed. And the thing about removed, Harry thought, was that it was enough for right now. Right now was all that was required. The day after the verdict, Amelia came to Grimmauld Place for breakfast. This was not unusual. It had become, over the past 2 months, approximately a weekly occurrence. Amelia at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and case files, Sirius making more food than anyone needed, Harry sitting across from her and working through whatever the current status of things was. Remus sometimes joined them. Pomfrey had come twice, both times ostensibly for Harry's final follow-up medical reviews and both times staying for 3 hours of conversation that had nothing to do with medicine. The case files Amelia brought today were different. "Hogwarts," she said, pushing the first folder across to Harry. He opened it. It was the Board of Governors situation. The investigation had exposed the financial relationship between the board slush fund and the Edinburgh laboratory, which meant several board members were under investigation, which meant the board was in administrative disarray, which meant the school had a governance problem. "The headmistress position," Harry said. He'd been following the board situation closely. "Who's being considered?" "McGonagall," Amelia said. "Minerva McGonagall, currently deputy headmistress. She's the clear choice on merit and the staff supports her unanimously." "The board is fractured," Harry said. "Who are the holdouts?" "2 members who were peripherally connected to the slush fund situation and are being cagey about approval while their own legal exposure is assessed. They're not blocking outright, just slowing. Can you move the Wizengamot to approve an emergency appointment? Bypass the board for the interim period while the governance review is completed?" Amelia looked at him. "That's legally possible under emergency educational provisions. It would require a majority Wizengamot vote." "Augusta Longbottom will bring it," Harry said. "She'd have approved it a month ago if someone had asked her." "Has anyone asked her?" Amelia was quiet for a moment. "No. Ask her today," Harry said. "McGonagall should be running that school before term. The students need stability and she's the right person." Amelia made a note. "The second folder," she said. Harry opened it. It was a briefing document on Voldemort's current status, assembled from the intelligence gathered in the Edinburgh and Wiltshire operations. It was, in the way of all intelligence documents about things that were incompletely known, more notable for what it didn't say than what it did. What was confirmed, Voldemort was alive, in some diminished form, somewhere. What was not confirmed, where? What he was doing. The timeline for a serious attempt at return. What the document did say clearly was that the Wiltshire operation had set him back. The network they dismantled was a real network and its loss was a real loss, the forward infrastructure for a return attempt, the people who would have been doing the preparatory work, gone. He'd have to rebuild, and rebuilding took time, and time was what they had now. "Peter Pettigrew," Harry said, reading a name in the document. He looked up. "He's the one who betrayed my parents." Amelia nodded carefully. "He's unconfirmed in location. He was believed dead, faked, apparently. He's been in hiding. We think he's in proximity to Voldemort's current location, whatever form that location takes. He's the key," Harry said. "Wherever Pettigrew is, Voldemort is close. Finding Pettigrew finds the source." He looked at Sirius, who had gone very still at the stove. "Sirius." "I know," Sirius said. His voice was quiet and controlled in the way of something that was not controlled at all underneath. "You were imprisoned for what he did," Harry said. "I know what finding him means for you. But it has to be done cleanly. Legally. Amelia needs him alive and talking, not the other thing." Sirius set down the pan he was holding. He turned around. His face was doing the thing it did when it held more than it wanted to. "I know," he said again. "Do you?" A pause. A real one, Sirius actually thinking about whether the answer was honest. "I can do it right," he said finally. "If I know you're safe. If the network's down and the immediate threat is managed. Then I can do the right thing with Pettigrew." He held Harry's gaze. "I promise." Harry nodded. "Find him," he said to Amelia. Amelia wrote it down. McGonagall's emergency appointment was approved by the Wizengamot 17 days after the trial verdict. Augusta Longbottom had brought the motion, as Harry had suggested, and it had passed 38-9 with 3 abstentions, a decisive margin that reflected both genuine support for McGonagall and the Wizengamot's institutional desire to demonstrate that Hogwarts was in capable hands while everything else was in flux. Sirius told Harry the result from a Morning Prophet. Harry read the article. It was a good article, factual and clear, with a photograph of McGonagall looking precisely as stern and capable as Harry had come to expect from Sirius's and Remus's descriptions of her, and felt something that was genuinely satisfying in the deep, specific way that things you'd worked toward felt when they landed correctly. She sent a letter, Sirius said, handing him a second envelope. Harry opened it. It was brief, which he'd have expected from what he understood of her. Mr. Potter, I understand from Director Bones that several of the institutional recommendations that have positively affected the governance of this school can be traced, in part, to your analysis and suggestions. I do not know what to do with the fact that I owe a partial professional debt to a 6-year-old, but I intend to honor it in the most direct way available to me. Hogwarts will be ready for you when you are ready for it. Whatever form that readiness takes. I do not intend to constrain your education to the standard model, which I understand would be inadequate to the purpose, and I intend to say so clearly to whoever needs to hear it. I look forward to meeting you properly. M. McGonagall, Headmistress, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his jacket pocket. Good, he said. Just good. Sirius said. Very good, Harry said. He paused. I think I'm going to like her. Everyone likes McGonagall, Sirius said. Especially the ones she terrifies. Harry considered that. I don't think she'll terrify me. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. No, he agreed. I don't think she will either. Narcissa came for tea on a Thursday in December. She came alone, not with Lucius, who was in the late stages of his cooperating witness process with Amelia's office and was managing his own complicated situation. Just Narcissa, in pale grey again, arriving at the Grimmauld Place front door with the composed precision that Harry had catalogued as her default register. She brought Draco. The boy arrived at the door with his mother's posture and his own 4-year-old energy contained within it, and he saw Harry and immediately said, I brought something, and produced a small model dragon from his coat pocket with the specific pride of a child presenting a gift they've thought about. It breathes fire, Draco said. Real fire, but small. Can you make it go? Harry looked at the model. It was well made, brass with articulated wings, and it looked at him with tiny enchanted eyes that tracked movement. He held out his hand and Draco put it in it. Harry looked at it for a moment. The magic in it was simple, a fire-producing enchantment keyed to a specific intention. He let his magic find the intention, found it the way you found a note in a familiar key, and the dragon lifted its head and breathed a small, perfect column of flame about 6 inches long. Draco made a sound of pure 4-year-old delight. Can you make it go higher? How high would you like? Very high. Harry made it go very high, about 2 feet, which for a model dragon the size of a hand was genuinely impressive, and Draco watched it with his hands clasped together and his eyes very bright, and Narcissa, who was watching from the hallway entrance, had the unguarded expression on her face again, the one she didn't know Harry could see. He was going to let her have it. She'd earned it. They went to the kitchen. Grimmauld Place had moved from the study to the kitchen as the main meeting room, which Harry considered an improvement, and Sirius made tea with the slightly strained hospitality of someone being pointedly civil to someone they didn't fully trust and was managing it quite well, all things considered. The post-trial landscape, Narcissa said, when tea was settled and Draco had migrated to the corner with his dragon and a stack of books Harry had put there 2 days ago on the vague intuition that this visit was coming. What about it? Harry said. The political realignment. The families who were Dumbledore aligned are repositioning. The ones who were Voldemort adjacent are doing the same. There's a significant middle group, old families, significant resources, no clear current allegiance, who are waiting to see what the new order looks like before committing. She met Harry's eyes. They're waiting to see what you look like. I'm not building a faction, Harry said. I know. That's actually why they're interested. She held his gaze. You dismantled Dumbledore's network and Voldemort's forward infrastructure within 2 months of being removed from a situation that by any objective measure should have broken you. You testified in the Wizengamot at age 6 without notes and without fear. You've done all of it without performing allegiance to anyone or building an apparatus around yourself. She paused. That is a very specific kind of power, and the people who understand power recognize it. What are they looking for from me? Not allegiance. Not protection. Something less formal and more significant. She turned her teacup slightly on its saucer. They want to know that when Voldemort returns, and they're realistic people, they know he returns, there is a version of events in which the response is not another Dumbledore. Another chess player arranging everyone else's pieces. She met his eyes. They want to know that the person who'll be at the center of it is someone who thinks for themselves. Harry looked at her for a long moment. You're describing a different kind of alliance. I'm describing the natural order that fills the vacuum when a very powerful centralizing force is removed, she said. It's going to form around something. I'm suggesting that what it forms around matters. And you want to be positioned in whatever it forms around. I want my son to grow up in a world where the structures of power have some accountability to the people they affect, Narcissa said. It was precise and honest, and Harry believed it, not because it was selfless, it wasn't, it was thoroughly interested, but because it was true alongside the self-interest rather than instead of it. He looked at Draco in the corner. The boy had set down the dragon and opened the top book. It was a basic magical theory text, the same one Harry had started with, and was looking at the first page with the focused, serious attention of someone who had decided to engage. Tell the families, Harry said, that I'm not interested in structures of power. I'm interested in the specific problem of Voldemort and the specific project of making sure that when that problem is solved, the solution belongs to the people it affects. He paused. If they want to be part of that, they can make themselves useful. I'm not in the business of accepting allegiances. I'll accept help. Narcissa looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded. That will do, she said. That will do very well, actually. January brought Pettigrew. Frank's team found him in a cottage in rural Scotland, living as his animagus form, a rat, which Sirius had identified as the specific animagus shape when pressed, with an expression that suggested the information still made him feel physically ill, within what turned out to be the last known location of Voldemort's current form. Which was not, as Harry had expected, a person or a body. It was a wraith-like presence sustained in the cottage's atmosphere, barely coherent, barely alive, kept going by Pettigrew's proximity and the specific dark magic of a servant's devotion. Pettigrew was arrested. He was terrified and sycophantic and comprehensively unimpressive, and when Sirius saw him in the Ministry holding facility, Harry insisted on being present. He watched Sirius look at Peter Pettigrew through the cell glass. He watched the 12 years of rage and grief and Azkaban move across Sirius's face and then, slowly, deliberately, be put somewhere. Not away, you couldn't put that away. But contained. Chosen against. Pettigrew gave a full confession in exchange for the minimum sentence. His testimony, about the Potter's secret keeper switch, about his own betrayal, about the nature of Voldemort's current state, went into the Ministry record and sealed Sirius's formal exoneration in a way that the earlier acquittal, which had been procedurally thorough, had not quite managed to do emotionally. It was the document, specifically. A formal Ministry declaration that Sirius Orion Black had been wrongfully imprisoned, that no crime had been committed, that the Ministry of Magic extended, in the necessarily inadequate language of institutional apology, its sincerest regret. Sirius read it at the kitchen table. He read it twice. Then he set it down and looked at the wall for a while, and Harry sat across from him and didn't say anything, because this was a moment that didn't require words, and Harry had learned, in the accumulation of these months, when that was true. After a while Sirius said, "Thank you." "I didn't do the finding," Harry said. "No," Sirius said. "But you told me to do it right. When I could have, when I had every reason to do the other thing. You told me to do it right and I did, and this is what right looks like." He looked at the document. "This is what right looks like." Harry looked at the document too. At the formal language in it, the careful legalistic acknowledgement of a terrible wrong. It was inadequate. It was insufficient. It was the best the institution could do, and the institution was a human thing, limited and flawed and prone to its own gravity, and this was it doing better than it had before. "It's not enough," Sirius said. "It's not enough for 12 years. "No," Harry agreed. "But it's the start of enough. The rest is time." Sirius looked at him. "When did you get so old?" "I've been old for a while," Harry said. "I'm catching up to it physically." Sirius laughed. It was the good laugh, the sudden, real one, and it filled the kitchen at Grimmauld Place and went up into the old house's bones, and the house seemed to hold it for a moment before letting it go. Voldemort's wraith state was the last and hardest problem. The Ministry forensic team had assessed the cottage in Scotland and produced a report that Amelia delivered to Harry and Sirius and Remus in early February. The document was thorough and careful and arrived at a conclusion that was technically described as non-corporeal dark magical entity sustained by sustained proximity devotion, and which Harry translated into plain language as, Voldemort was alive in the way that a flame was alive when it had no oxygen. Barely dependent. But not gone, and with the capacity, given sufficient fuel, to return to something more. Pettigrew had been that fuel. With Pettigrew removed, the entity was weakening. The forensic team estimated, with appropriate caution, that without a new host or sustaining mechanism the wraith state would be unsustainable within 2 to 4 months. Harry read the report. He read it again. He thought about the prophecy. He will have power the Dark Lord knows not. He thought about what that meant. About what Dumbledore had thought it meant, love, the blood protection, the sacrificial magic. And about the question Harry had been sitting with since the Department of Mysteries, what if the power wasn't love exactly? What if it was something love produced, something love made possible? What if the power the Dark Lord couldn't understand was simply the power that came from being genuinely, completely, unmanipulated yourself? Voldemort's entire existence was control. His own nature, his own name, his own mortality, all of it controlled, all of it managed, all of it bent to the will of a person who had decided that power and self-determination were the same thing. That the self was something to be made, manufactured, imposed on the world. Harry had spent the first 6 years of his life having his self manufactured by someone else. He knew what that felt like from the inside. He knew the difference between that and the real thing. He went to the Department of Mysteries with Amelia, and he asked to see the prophecy again, and he held the globe in the cottage light and he didn't listen to the words this time. He listened to the magic underneath them. The magic of a prophecy was not the language. The language was translation, a human rendering of something that existed in a register that wasn't language at all. He'd learned that from Ren, in one of the early theoretical sessions. All magic had a signal and a medium, and they weren't the same thing, and most people got so focused on the medium they missed the signal. He listened for the signal. It was warm. It was moving. It was, and this was the part he sat with, in the quiet of the Hall of Prophecy with its rows of other futures glowing gently in the blue light, it felt like choice. Pure, clean, unconstrained choice. Not power as force. Power as the freedom to be entirely oneself. The power the Dark Lord knows not. He'd never known it. Had spent his whole existence trying to destroy it in himself and others. The freedom to simply be. To be Harry, not a weapon or a prophecy child or a loyally potioned tool. To be Sirius, not an Azkaban prisoner. To be Remus. To be all the people Voldemort had broken and tried to make into instruments of his will. That was the thing he couldn't understand. Not because he lacked intelligence but because he had fundamentally and irreversibly chosen to be something other than himself, and that choice made certain kinds of knowing impossible. Harry put the globe back. He thought about what that meant practically. About the wraith in the Scottish cottage, weakening. About whether the prophecy required a dramatic confrontation, a combat, a moment where the power was demonstrated in force. Or whether what the prophecy described was simply the outcome that resulted from a freely made self encountering an imposed one. Maybe it wasn't about fighting Voldemort at all. Maybe it was about being so completely, unambiguously himself that Voldemort's nature couldn't survive in proximity to it. He brought this to Remus on a Tuesday afternoon. Remus sat with it for a long time. Long enough that Harry knew he was taking it seriously rather than dismissing it. "You think the prophecy is already being fulfilled," Remus said finally. "I think it was fulfilled the moment the potion started clearing," Harry said. "I think every step since then has been consequence, not cause. The cause was becoming myself. The consequence is everything else." Remus looked at him with the expression he sometimes had, the one where he was seeing both James and Lily and also something that was neither of them, something that was only Harry, entirely and originally Harry. "Then what does the final confrontation look like?" "I don't think it's a confrontation," Harry said. "I think someone needs to find where the wraith is now and simply be there. With full magic present. Unconstrained." He paused. "I think it ends quietly." Remus exhaled. "That's either the most profound thing I've heard about this prophecy or the most dangerous oversimplification." "Could be both," Harry said. "How do you propose we find out without risking you?" "We do the homework first. We confirm the forensic team's assessment, that it's weakening, that there's no sustaining mechanism currently active. We confirm the 2 to 4 month timeline. We wait." He looked at Remus. "And if I'm wrong about the quiet ending, I'll be there with my wand and my calibrated bleed channel and everything Ren and you have taught me, and it won't be quiet. But I think I'm right." Remus looked at him for a long moment. "Your instincts about your own magic have been correct at every point." "Yes," Harry said, without particular pride. "Just acknowledging the record." "Then let's do the homework," Remus said. They did the homework. The forensic team conducted 3 assessments over 6 weeks, and each one confirmed the previous: the wraith was weakening. The rate of decline was accelerating. By mid-March the assessment was that the entity was at approximately 12% of its already diminished capacity and declining by roughly 2% per week. Harry tracked the numbers. He thought about them. He thought about the prophecy and the power and what he understood about Voldemort's fundamental nature and what he understood about his own. He went, on a cold March morning, to Amelia's office. "I need to go to Scotland," he said. Amelia looked at him across her desk. The case files around her were different now. The Dumbledore investigation was closed, the Wiltshire aftermath was in the processing stage, the ministry breach had been identified and sealed. The desk had the quality of a desk that had been through something significant and was in the early stages of returning to normal, whatever normal was going to be in this new configuration. "Tell me why," she said. He told her. All of it, the prophecy, the signal underneath the words, the theory about the power and what it meant. She listened the way she always listened, completely, without interrupting, filing everything. When he finished she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You want to go there and simply be present?" "Yes." "With your magic fully present and unconstrained?" "Yes." "And your theory is that the combination of a dying wraith and a fully realized magical core is enough to end it?" "I think the confrontation the prophecy describes isn't a battle," Harry said. "I think it's a contact. 2 fundamentally incompatible natures coming into proximity. His nature is constructed, every part of it chosen, managed, imposed. Mine is," he paused, finding the right word, "restored. I spent 6 years having it suppressed and it came back completely. There's nothing manufactured in it. Nothing controlled." He met Amelia's eyes. That's the incompatibility. Not power level. Nature. Amelia drummed her fingers once on the desk. One beat, then still. I want Sirius with you. And Frank outside. Agreed. And if you're wrong, if I'm wrong, Sirius pulls me out and we regroup and try the other way, Harry said. I'm not attached to being right. I'm attached to being effective. Amelia looked at him for a long time. In the window behind her, London moved through its grey March afternoon. A memo zoomed past in the corridor outside. All right, she said. When? Tomorrow, Harry said. The cottage in Scotland was on a hillside above a grey loch, and the sky on the morning they went was the specific pale silver of early spring, thin light coming through thin cloud, the ground soft with recent rain. The hills around it were brown and green and enormous in the way of Scottish hills, which didn't ask your permission to be impressive. Harry and Sirius walked the path to the cottage in silence. Frank was 200 meters back at the road. Remus had offered to come and Harry had said no, and Remus had accepted that in the way he accepted most of Harry's decisions, with the careful, earned trust of someone who had watched the decisions be made well consistently enough to extend the benefit of the doubt. The cottage was small and stone and unremarkable. The wards were gone, removed by the forensic team in their assessments. The door was unlocked. Harry put his hand on the door. Sirius stood behind and to his left, wand out, the position Harry had assigned him in the plan, the angle he couldn't watch, and his face was the composed, focused face of a man who was afraid and had made peace with being afraid and was going anyway. Ready? Harry said. No, Sirius said. Go. Harry opened the door. The cottage was cold and dim and smelled of earth and something older, something that had the quality of an absence that had been present too long. The forensic team's assessment markers were still on the far wall, small luminescent dots indicating where the entity had been strongest, where the concentration of dark magic had been highest. The marks were faded. Almost gone. Harry stood in the doorway and let himself be entirely present. Not performing anything. Not pushing. Not controlling. Just, himself. Completely. All of it, the magic moving under his skin the way it always moved now, the large and patient and thoroughly his own quality of it, unconstrained and unmanufactured and restored from the suppression of 67 potions and 6 years of a cupboard under the stairs. He felt it immediately. A cold point in the corner of the room. A faint resistance in the atmosphere, the magical equivalent of a pressure differential. Something that was aware of him, that had been aware of him since the door opened, that was registering his presence with what he could only describe as recognition. The prophecy. He will mark him as his equal. The recognition was mutual, something in Voldemort's fragmented, barely coherent remaining self recognized Harry the way the blood keyed protections recognized him. As the thing it was defined in opposition to. Harry looked at the corner. It's over, he said. Not to frighten. Not to command. Just, the way you might tell someone a fact they needed to know. The cold point pulsed once. A last, reflexive assertion, I am not over, I will not be, the way a flame flares before it goes out. Harry's magic didn't push back. It didn't fight. It was simply there, warm and enormous and entirely real, and the warmth of it and the realness of it were the incompatible thing, the thing Voldemort's constructed, controlled, fundamentally inauthentic nature had no architecture to survive in. The cold point faded. It didn't explode. It didn't produce a flash of light or a dramatic expenditure of force. It faded the way a dream fades in the moments after waking, not gone all at once, but unmade, returned to the nothing it had always fundamentally been beneath all the power and the terror and the long, awful shadow. The room was warm. Just a room. Cold stone walls and an old hearth and the pale morning light through small windows and the smell of rain on grass coming through the open door. Harry stood in it for a moment. Then he turned around and walked back out. Sirius was exactly where he'd been, position, wand up, watching. His eyes found Harry immediately. Harry gave him a small nod. Sirius's face moved through something enormous and private and came out the other side looking like a person who had just put down a weight they'd been carrying for a very long time. "That's it?" Sirius said. "That's it," Harry said. Sirius looked at the cottage. At the open door. At the still, ordinary morning air coming out of it. "That's it," he said again, differently this time. Like he was putting it on a shelf and looking at it from a step back. 7 years. 2 wars. A prophecy. And it ends with you just, standing in a room. "The prophecy said I had power he didn't know," Harry said. He looked at the lock below the hill, the pale silver of it in the morning light. He didn't know what it was like to be completely yourself. He'd never experienced that. He'd been constructing himself since he was 11 years old and he never stopped. He paused. He didn't know what he was up against. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Are you sure?" "Completely sure." Harry looked at the cottage. He reached out with his magic, not hard, just the way you test the air with your hand before stepping outside, and found nothing. No dark presence. No cold point. No residue of the wraith. Just the ordinary magical texture of an old building on a Scottish hillside. "Yes," he said. Sirius exhaled. It was a long, slow exhale, the kind that had a lot of history in it. Harry looked at the lock. A bird landed on the water surface far below and the circle of its landing spread outward and outward until it was too small to see. "What happens now?" Sirius said. Harry thought about it. He thought about McGonagall's letter in his jacket pocket. About Wren's next lesson, tomorrow at 7. About Remus at the kitchen table on Tuesday afternoons. About Narcissa's tea and Draco's dragon breathing its small column of fire. About Amelia's desk and the case files that were going to be different now, new problems, normal ones, the kind that didn't have a prophecy in the background. About Grimmauld Place and the second hook on the wall at his height and the portrait that stayed quiet when he told it to. About what it felt like to be 6 years old and entirely, completely himself. No manufactured loyalties. No chemical instructions about who to trust or what to feel. No cupboard. No suppression. No plan that belonged to someone else. Just this. The hill and the lock in the morning and the person standing beside him who was afraid every day and showed up anyway and had put a hook on the wall at his height. "Breakfast," Harry said. Sirius blinked. "Breakfast. I'm hungry. I'm always hungry after magic." He started down the hill path toward where Frank was waiting at the road. There was a place in the village on the way in. It looked like it did eggs. Sirius stared at him for a moment. Then he started to laugh, the Real laugh, the sudden and unguarded one that Harry had catalogued as his favorite sound in the new vocabulary of his actual life. It rang out across the Scottish hillside and went up into the silver morning sky and scattered a group of birds from the reeds at the lock's edge. "Eggs," Sirius said. "Yeah. Absolutely. Let's get eggs." They walked down the hill together, the 6-year-old and his godfather, and the cottage stood empty and ordinary above them, and the lock was silver and still, and the world was changed in the way it was changed when something that had been wrong for a very long time was finally, simply, put right. Harry walked with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face in the pale spring light and his magic moving easy and warm and entirely his own under his skin, and he thought about nothing except breakfast, and it was the most extraordinary thing he had ever thought about. The path curved down toward the road and the village and the eggs, and the morning opened up ahead of them, clean and new and full of nothing that had been decided in advance by anyone except the two of them, and that was everything, and it was enough, and Harry Potter walked into it without hesitation, without fear, and completely himself.